High in the air above a bloodied battlefield, countless streams of energy were slowly gathering in one place. The streams intertwined with one another, weaving a large and all-seeing eye that watched over the entire battlefield beneath it. Thus, the record of the calamity began. Tightly clutching the blood-soaked spear and clad in black leather armor that had been torn to shreds, a man stood facing his opponents with a mocking smile. His jet-black hair was disheveled, and his body was bruised and battered. However, he paid no heed to the wounds and instead let his gaze roam over the vast expanse. His vibrant eyes and his fierce gaze observed the enemies that surrounded him from all sides. There was no way out. The man knew that he would die here. But even in the face of imminent death, his expression did not falter. It was filled with mockery. To think that the oldies left their reeking caves to fight next to the young prodigies of the Origin Expanse. I would have never expected to be that popular amongst the young and old. The man chuckled with a hearty smile on his face. I can even see some arch-enemies putting aside their worthless pride to ally against me. That's so sweet, Tilda. The elven empress was present, and so were the Usura emperor, the demon king, the dwarven lords, and many more esteemed figures who hardly ventured outside their territory. However, today was different. Today's action was a necessity to ensure their survival and the end of a vexing cockroach. Instead of facing each other with their grand armies to tear their enemies apart, all arch-rivals stood united, their blades pointed in one direction. The man could hear the roars of some oldies while others sneered, but his smile never ceased. They looked confident. However, their eyes exposed the true feeling they held in their hearts, uncontrollable fear. Despite being heavily outnumbered, he did not make a move. Everyone was wary of the man's final attack, their weapons poised to strike the coiled serpent the moment he bared his fangs. The standoff continued for several hours until the sun set behind the horizon. The last rays of sunlight shone upon the battlefield, and the effect was catastrophic. At that moment, it was as if the battlefield turned into a sea of blazing flames. The man finally turned his body. Alerted, the powerhouses surrounding him took a big step backward. By now, the man's surrounding was stained with his blood. His face was deadly pale, and in the glow of the descending sun, it held a brilliant glisten. Watching the setting sun, he chuckled lightly. My fangs, why? The man stopped in his movements, and he stiffened as he realized something. This. He gazed at a certain spot in the air above him, and uncontrollable anger swept through his body. Who are you? How dare you use a spell on me? The man's eyes narrowed, and he changed his stance in an instant. His abyss-like eyes shone, unveiling something that was hidden from the rest of the world. Twisting his body, he threw the black spear without hesitation, cutting through the emptiness that unfolded in front of him. And the moment the spear made contact with the void, space twisted and the scene changed. What was left behind was a horrified young man writhing in endless pain after having been pierced by a razor-sharp blade, a spear blade. Clutching his chest, the young man shot up from his seat, feeling dazed. However, the only thing he saw when he looked down at his chest was a familiar old, tattered book. What the hell was that? Mr. Fang, it seems like you want to be the first to enter the examination chamber. Don't you think that you are a little bit too excited? A familiar voice reached the young man. He looked up just to see that he was in the classroom. More than 30 students were staring at him, some confused why he had turned himself into a target, while others were suppressing their scornful smiles. However, the young man didn't pay them any attention. What the hell was that just now? He looked down at his chest again, but there was nothing. There was no gaping hole in his chest, not even an injury or a scar. The only thing resting in his hands was an old, tattered book. The events vividly narrated in the book sounded like they came straight out of an unrealistic but decently written fantasy novel. Nobody would believe that the events had truly occurred. However, that was exactly what Michael had been told when he was younger. Everyone in his family told him that the tattered book was the unblemished truth behind their first ancestors' actions. He was wary of his parents a bit but knew that his brother would never knowingly lie to him, not anymore. Nonetheless, it was hard to believe such nonsense. Did I just dream about a snippet of the past? Michael wondered. He recalled the dream and compared it to the content of the book he recalled. It was the same. Michael Fang, I am talking to you. The familiar voice rang through the classroom once again, angry and commanding this time. But Michael was deep in thought, wondering about the man on the battlefield. The voice resounding in the classroom distracted him too much, so he subconsciously spoke his thoughts aloud. "Oh, fuck this Mr. Fang. Examination chamber now," the man bellowed, finally dragging Michael out of his train of thought. He looked up in confusion, and he only regained his senses when he looked into the wrathful eyes of Mr. Kellen Dame, their homeroom teacher. Oh, right, the graduation exam. Michael was still a little confused, but it looked like he didn't have enough time to organize his thoughts. His homeroom teacher was staring daggers at him, which only changed once Michael reached out for his backpack. He put the tattered book inside and walked up to his teacher. At the same time, he took a quick glance at the projection that formed above the crystal watch on his wrist. 9:01 a.m. If I start my exam now, I'll be done by lunchtime. That leaves me enough time to gather my thoughts before tomorrow. It may come in handy, he thought. The projection disappeared a moment later. The crystal watch was a standard model given to all students at the age of 17. Other than telling time and creating a projection, it had access to Starnet, a stellar network providing information and means to communicate with other humans across the stellar system. This was the most important function of the crystal watch, for most students at least. When Michael arrived next to his homeroom teacher at the front of the class, he heard Mr. Dame's familiar, "Looking at you, I cannot help but feel my heart throb in pain. Don't even dare of acting arrogantly if you pass the graduation exam with flying colors. You're as good as dead if you think that your life inside the Origin Expanse will be the same." The hidden meaning behind his homeroom teacher's words was obvious, but most students were already accustomed to that, including Michael. "Mr. Dame, don't worry so much. You've warned us often enough, we understand. Not everyone will awaken their war rune in the first place," a student with an athletic physique said while lifting his right hand high into the air. His mocking smile was aimed at Michael. A tattoo that shone in a faint white light was etched on the back of the student's right hand. It was the war rune he mentioned just now. However, nobody exclaimed upon seeing Nicholas Leekhoven's war rune. Most students threw a loathing glare at their classmates before ignoring him. Michael was the same. They knew that their homeroom teacher and Nicholas Leekhoven loved to team up to ridicule others. Michael was not sure how they found each other, but according to him, they were certainly soulmates. "Mr. Leekhoven, even if your war rune formed 2 days ago, you don't need to show it to everyone," Mr. Dame reprimanded, but he stressed some words to pull the attention of the class to Nicholas. Michael observed the Jew's tomfoolery for the next few minutes with various thoughts about the dream tormenting him. Once their teacher was done gloating over his favorite student, Mr. Dame led Michael outside. He took Michael to a small room near the classroom and told him to go inside. After Michael stepped inside, the chamber door sealed shut, cutting off all the background, and the entire world became deadly silent for Michael. At the same time, his homeroom teacher entered a different room. More than a dozen people were already inside the room, most of them teachers. However, none of them paid attention to Michael's homeroom teacher. They were busy staring at the dozen holographic screens showing one student each. Jasmine Blade, Oliver Kalt, and Peter Seekle. I should have started off with Nicholas as well, Mr. Dame thought, shaking his head lightly. It was already too late now, because a screen showing Michael popped up, but it was truly a shame. Michael was not fit to be in his class. He was simply not on the same level as his classmates. Having worked as a teacher for more than a decade, he had encountered too many students like Michael Fang. They came from ordinary families and thought highly of themselves just because they made it into one of the most prestigious high schools in the province. Unfortunately, entering a good school was just the starting line and not the end goal. Just wait for reality to crash down on you. You don't have any power or wealth, forget about connections. Someone like you is not fit to become a lord. As wicked as it may seem, life was never meant to be fair. Those who sought power would either overcome the obstacles thrown in their way, or they would be buried in the annals of history. As for the number of ordinary students who made it to the top after entering prestigious schools with more luck than wits and strength, they could be listed on a single page. "Is that your student, Kellen? I've never seen him before. Did you train a black horse trump while nobody looked your way?" One of the teachers sitting near Kellen Dame struck a conversation with him. When he realized that the other teachers had brought their aces to the examination chamber to show off their great teachings to the esteemed guests, he gave up trying to contest with them. Friendly competition was nice, but these teachers were known for going overboard. A hidden trump. Don't joke with me, Hagen. Michael Fang is just a commoner without any noteworthy background. That kid is just lucky, Kellen Dame answered with a humorless chuckle. His brother was fortunate enough to manifest a war rune and retain his status as lord for a few years, but that's already it. Michael paid attention in class, but that was already it. There was nothing special about that youngster. He is a loner and only knows how to read and sleep. He barely made it to the final year, Kellen added. Hagen looked at his colleague and frowned. Why did I even strike up a conversation with him? He's just trying to humiliate his student by sending him off first, he thought. For a moment, he asked himself what he was even doing in a prestigious school that specialized in teaching students about the Origin Expanse and the livelihood of lords and adventurers. Great payment without risking my life. Every day turns jerks into lovely puppies, that's for sure, Hagen thought, shaking his head lightly. He was about to say something to Kellen when he heard someone approaching them from behind. Are you sure you're talking about the student you sent to the examination chamber? Your description seems off. A sudden voice interrupted the teacher's chat. Kellen Dame was about to call out the owner of the voice for her rude behavior, but he froze when he saw the beautiful yet fierce-looking woman who was wearing casual clothes. She stood imposingly behind the teachers, as if the entire place belonged to her, which was not exactly wrong. Miss Z, Kellen Dame stammered, just to be intercepted by the newcomer. I asked something, the woman said impatiently, her tone demanding obedience. Yes, yes, of course. Please, wait a moment. Mr. Dame responded hurriedly, turning back to the monitors to look at the holographic screen featuring Michael. He sensed that something was off, but he didn't expect something so nonsensical to happen right in front of his eyes. Who the hell is that, and what did he do to the sloth I know? Is that really Michael? A few minutes earlier, inside the examination chamber, a hologram appeared the moment the door sealed shut. A countdown was initiated, and an emotionless, mechanical voice rang out upon hitting 0. The examination will begin at any moment. Please confirm your ID. Student Michael Fang. Student ID number 53,63229. Michael responded calmly, even though he was a little excited. Once this shit is over, I am finally free. He had expected a lot from the most prestigious school in the Golden Sun province when he got accepted, but he quickly noticed just how fake and partial the entire school was. They didn't really care about students with little to no background, or they just didn't care about him specifically. Even if some classes were quite interesting to Michael, because they were about the Origin Expanse, school life was boring as hell. Most students didn't bother trying to befriend Michael because they couldn't gain benefits from him, but it was not as if Michael was concerned about that. He would rather be a loner than popular with countless fake friends who were after connections, wealth, and opportunities. Genuine friendship was hard to come by, especially in a prestigious elite school where most students were descendants of powerful and influential families. Everyone was told to give their best and be the top performer in class to bring honor to their family. This was only given in an era where families competed against each other every day, creating a cutthroat competition. Unfortunately, the pressure these families put on their children was unhealthy, creating an unhealthy rift between their classmates. Groups were formed early on, and what ought to be healthy competition turned into a small-scale warzone. In his first year, Michael made a big blunder. He thought that nobody would feel offended even if he were to get good grades. His hope to make friends by studying together and talking about their school life motivated him to work even harder. Unfortunately, he ended up taking the first spot in class, turning him into the #1 bullying target. Being an ordinary student without noteworthy background was certainly not helpful at that time. It made things worse as his classmates grew jealous of him. It didn't take long before Michael gave up trying to get good grades. He chose to ignore his classmates and stay under the radar while working for his own good. Attending the most prestigious elite school in the Golden Sun province was something he had done to expand his knowledge and prepare for the Origin Expanse, not to make friends. Student ID of Michael Fang has been verified. Iris scan and fingerprint scan will start at any moment. Please be patient. A dim light shone into Michael's eyes, and a small holographic screen manifested in front of his hands. Michael pressed his hands against the holographic screen and waited. Match confirmed. Commencing the graduation exam of student Michael Fang. Student, prepare yourself. In response to the emotionless voice, a dazzling light flared up. The light filled the entire examination chamber, forcing Michael to shut his eyes tightly. Several seconds passed before he opened his eyes once again, and he saw himself standing in front of a huge mountain. I cannot even see the tip of the mountain. How high is that? He wondered while trying to gauge its height as the clouds hovered above the mountain peak. Cold gusts brushed against his face, carrying forth the howls and roars of monsters. Michael bent down to touch the wet soil. Afterward, he took a deep breath and inhaled the chilling air. His senses weren't restricted at all. Is this really an illusion? This feels so real. Over the course of the last centuries, the graduation exam of high school students had undergone some drastic changes. The most important change was the appearance of the illusionary land of examination that was created by the examination chamber. The land around him was a sight to behold, and Michael was curious to further examine it, but time was of the essence. He composed himself and walked forward before starting to climb the mountain. A path led up to the tip of the mountain, but the whole track was filled with countless dangers and traps. His graduation exam score would be calculated by measuring how far he made it through the track and how he solved the problems that would be thrown his way eventually. Choose a weapon. The mechanical voice rang out the moment he made it to the well-trodden path. Give me a thin longsword, please. Double edge, straight blade, and pointed tip, Michael requested instantly. Swords may not be considered the best weapon in every area, whether it was their destructive force, range, and so on, but they were certainly one of the most versatile weapons one could use. In unknown territory, they would be extremely helpful. Furthermore, his brother always chose to teach him to wield a sword whenever he came back from the Origin Expanse. It was only obvious that Michael chose the weapon he was the most familiar with. An ordinary double-edged longsword materialized in front of him, and Michael grasped it tightly. Let's make good use of you, buddy, he mumbled, swinging it a few times to familiarize himself with the sword's weight and balance. Soon enough, Michael had to make use of the longsword, not even a minute later, when he paced through the mountain's open track. The faint sound of something cutting through the air reached him, and his head flicked upward. Several thick clouds covered the bright sun, and amid them, a pair of emoctiles dived down at him. Emoctiles were commonly known as prehistoric pterosaurs with large wings and sharp teeth. Their bodies were emerald green with elongated wings. They had claw-like projections at the tip of their wings and a short, triangular-shaped tail. Despite their size being on the smaller side, like a mid-sized dog, they were dangerous creatures that shouldn't be underestimated, especially their speed. A low Tier 0 monster with an elevated level of intelligence right off the bat. Seems like graduating won't be that easy, Michael snickered before he prepared himself for the incoming attack. Most people wouldn't know much about emoctiles, but Michael had studied all volumes of the monster index he could find in the school's online library. Others did not pay much attention to Tier 0 monsters because they would be able to reach a higher tier with the resources they would receive upon entering the Origin Expanse, but Michael was different. He knew that his survival depended on the knowledge and skills he had procured over the years. Observing every inch of his surroundings was one of the skills that had been imprinted into his mind. It had now become an instinctive act. He readied himself and launched himself to the side when the pair of emoctiles was about to reach him. His timing was impeccable. It was just a split second before the emoctiles would reach him, their razor-sharp teeth about to dig into his shoulders. Michael's lightning-fast reflexes were enough to evade the two monsters, and furthermore, hit one of the emoctiles who were incapable of changing their directions in an instant. Emoctiles were assassins, not meat shields. Their bodies were fragile and primarily designed for ambushing, not fighting an opponent head-on. In a single clash, Michael was able to sever one of the emoctiles. The other emoctile tried to flee, but it had dived down too fast before, restraining itself from quickly changing direction and ascending back into the air. Michael dashed forward, piercing the emactyle's back when it was about to soar into the air. Ding asterisk. The emactyle's bodies disintegrated into particles. Meanwhile, the examination chamber added points to his score after careful calculation of his actions. I feel a little lighter. Is the illusory land even capable of replicating the energy influx from killing monsters of the Origin Expanse? This was interesting, and it changed his perception of the graduation exam a little. After reorganizing his thoughts and strategizing for a minute, Michael continued to climb the mountain. Not even 20 minutes later, he had already killed more than 10 low-tier 0 emactyles. The examination had just begun, but Michael could tell that this was nothing more than a warm-up. He felt that the difficulty would increase soon enough, otherwise, the horrifying rumors revolving around the graduation exam wouldn't exist in the first place. But before Michael encountered the horror of the final examination, he had to answer a bunch of questions. A holographic screen appeared in the air in front of him, revealing several questions. Michael had to answer them before he could proceed to climb the mountain. 1. What is a war rune? 60%. 2. What is the Origin Expanse? 20%. 3. Name the key factors lords must pay attention to when they build their territory. 20%. The questions are pretty simple, aren't they? Michael stared blankly at the questions for a while. He knew that most questions at the final examination were designed to be quite easy to solve, though they might be a little tricky at times. Otherwise, they would take up way too much time due to their complexity, leaving no time for a student to climb the mountain. Nonetheless, one should never skim through the questions and answer them half-heartedly to climb the mountain. The most up-to-date novels are published on letter 192R, EEWEB, ETA, OV, E letter 2113.com. After all, the percentage of correctly answered questions would be multiplied by the final deciding factor, precisely the altitude he reached before the countdown hit 0. There were a bunch of additional factors that were considered, but ignoring the questions was never a good thing. The percentages denoted the importance of the question. The second and third questions are not that important. That means no details needed. Good. I will answer number 3 first, Michael mumbled to himself before reciting what he had learned. As lords of territories, their main priority should be to ensure the security, economic development, infrastructure, natural resource management, social welfare, and proper management of relations with other territories. This will ensure the well-being and prosperity of their people and make sure that they will be loyal to their lords. Michael felt that this recitation was good and spot on. However, he figured that he missed something when he reread the answer he had given. Of course, it is important not to neglect military power, provide good education to their subjects, and make sure that their people will strive for innovation and cultural unity to promote stability and cooperation within the territory. That should be enough. The second question is a little bit more difficult to answer because we don't know the truth yet. The Origin Expanse was created by an existence unknown to mankind, for an unknown reason. It reached out to mankind 511 years ago and has become a part of humanity's daily life. The Origin Expanse is a mythical realm that possesses boundless treasures and habitats for countless races. It's said that all intelligent races in the entire universe can enter the Origin Expanse, which means that the entire universe is connected through the Origin Expanse. It's a place that allows humans to exceed their natural limits and become much stronger. It is a place where opportunities and dangers await one daily. Life and death are much closer in the Origin Expanse than anywhere else. He explained more thoroughly than he had initially intended. He then took a few deep breaths to collect his thoughts. Michael finished answering the second question without any significant issues. He was about to answer the first question when he noticed a group of 6 emactyles materializing in the sky above him. They took note of him at once and dove down without any hesitation. Just leave me alone and let me answer this fucking question. Michael's chest was heaving up and down heavily. A dozen cuts spread chaotically across his entire body, while fresh blood trickled down the thin longsword. Only a few minutes had passed since Michael finished answering 2 out of the 3 questions given, but he was already tired. More emactyles spawned in the air around him, making loud screeching noises as they circled him. They were restraining and distracting him. This was also part of the test. Amid the chaos, he gathered his thoughts, trying to come up with the best possible answers. The final examination tested the student's stamina, combat prowess, willpower, calculation abilities, and the ability to think quickly. All these factors combined would give a final score, which determined the initial quality of the graduate. Only by surpassing the ordinary would one be able to stand out from the crowd and distinguish oneself in the government's university entrance exam, stepping onto the road of real adults, where lords, adventurers, and influential organizations entered the big picture. The question, what is a war rune, can be answered easily, but given that the answer holds 60% weightage of the quiz part in this section, it needs to be more detailed. Michael thought before accessing the crystal watch to open a note. A holographic screen appeared in front of him, and he began to scribble a few pieces of information on it. This was quite helpful, since he could hardly focus on the question with more emoctiles diving down. In the next 10 minutes, Michael killed 10 emoctiles. He finished noting down the key points he recalled about the war rune. After he had the bullet points ready, Michael was quite satisfied with the final outcome, once he elaborated his answer in neat phrases. A war rune forms at the age of 18. However, not every intelligent life form manifests one. Everyone with a war rune is directly connected to the Origin Expanse and can enter it at will. All war runes have isolated storage space. The higher the war rune's tier, the larger the storage space. A war rune is a direct path to the soul. When a war rune manifests, the will of the Origin Expanse must confirm the link. Within a week, one must enter the Origin Expanse. Otherwise, the war rune's connection will slowly grow weak, and it will disappear at last. War runes are also known as limit breakers. Only by possessing the war rune is it possible to feel and absorb the energy prevalent in the Origin Expanse. Becoming stronger and exceeding the limit of a mortal human being is possible. Origin energy refines the war rune, and in return, the war rune nourishes and strengthens the body and mind. A few points mentioned in the list weren't directly pertaining to the given question. Thus, Michael scratched them. Organizing the notes, adding a few things, and scratching others, Michael spent a while until he was finally able to answer the first question that showcased his extensive knowledge on the subject. The tiny devils, aka emoctiles, continued to bother him while he kept adding more points, so as to ensure that he would pass in the written exam with flying colors. Unfortunately, Michael was quite sure that their numbers would only increase, and that the final examination would become trickier. Since there was no way around this predicament, he continued his trip to the top of the mountain. Michael had to fight more monsters, and there were more questions that had to be answered. Fortunately, not all questions required recitation or notes. They required bits of knowledge and a functioning brain. A newly summoned lord sends his summoned subjects outside the protection barrier to kill monsters. How many low-tier 0 monsters, 10, must be killed by the subjects until the lord's war rune is filled and ready to advance to the next tier? Evading several attacks from all around him, Michael nodded his head faintly. The question seemed quite difficult, but the answer was quite simple. A newly summoned Lord Summon will have a neutral link of loyalty. On average, the share of energy sent through a neutral link of loyalty is 1%. That means the low-tier 0 monster mentioned will provide 0.1 energy. Michael was not fond of calculating while razor-sharp fangs sunk deep into his shoulder, ripping out his flesh, but there was not much he could do about it. He gave his best, answered, and went ahead, not forgetting to cut the emoctiles around him into small pieces whenever they got too close to him. By the time he answered a few more questions, his entire body was covered in close to 100 cuts of many sizes. His shoulder was his biggest concern. Chunks of flesh were missing in several areas, and his shoulder blades were exposed to the chilling air of the mountain. He knew that it was just an illusion, but the pain was as real as it could be. Summary question: start of the Great Origin Era. No question was asked, but the task was obvious. He was supposed to summarize the start of the Great Origin Era. Let's see, Michael began, just to halt in his tracks. What kind of revelation would create the biggest impact on the scoring system? Should I start with the creation of the first successful colonization of another habitable star in another stellar system? The appearance of the alien races 563 years ago? The appearance of the Origin Expanse 511 years ago? or the birth of the First Lord 510 years ago? Michael thought about it for a moment before he noticed that his body was slowly crumbling from the constant attacks of the dozen or more emectiles swarming around him. Then he began. The Great Origin era began with tea. After he spoke for more than 10 minutes, Michael finished and closed his eyes for a moment. He felt dizzy and could hardly stand on his feet. A moment later, the searing pain in his shoulder disappeared. Confused, he opened his eyes. He was now standing in the middle of the examination chamber. The illusion was no more around him. His breathing was still ragged, and cold sweat trickled down his back, but he had left the illusion without a single visible injury. Finally, it's over, he mumbled, touching his body as if to make sure that everything was truly just an illusion. Congratulations, student Michael Fang. You've completed the final examination. Your score will be calculated in no time, and a notification will be forwarded within the following week once all students of the Golden Sun province have finished the final examination. Thanks for your cooperation. The thin longsword too disappeared from his hand, but he found his backpack lying around in the corner. Thanks, have fun torturing my classmates. You can be just as rough with them, Michael said sarcastically as he picked up his things, but the emotionless voice decided to reprimand him. I shall not favor anyone. Fairness is my highest priority. That was not meant, forget it, Michael responded, not even bothering with an explanation. He was already mentally exhausted, and his shoulder was a little sore. Actually, he felt sore wherever he was wounded in the illusion, but the shoulder was the most apparent. The receptors in my brain still think that I'm hurt. If that's the case, what would have happened if I had died inside the illusion? He thought, and began to shudder as his over-imaginative mind went wild. Well, whatever. I think I made it far enough to graduate. Nothing inside this building matters anymore. Michael chose not to ignore the soreness and pain all over his body. He would rather go home and ponder over his dream from earlier. The dream was permanently etched in his mind, and it continued to nag him, making him feel restless. It was bothersome and distracted him a lot. Furthermore, there was no reason for him to go back to class. Now that he was done, Michael was about to leave. However, before he could even make it out of the examination chamber, Michael found himself in a tricky situation. A fierce-looking woman was standing by the entrance, staring at him. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Michael bowed lightly to her. It was an instinctive move upon perceiving the fierceness in her gaze and the presence she radiated naturally. An unknown fierce beauty that can only mean trouble. He tried to walk past her after the bow, but the fierce-looking woman took this as a sign to initiate a conversation. Kiddo, how are you feeling? She asked, her voice crisp and sonorous. Kiddo, do I look like a kid? Michael wanted to retort, but he didn't speak his mind. Instead, he shrugged inwardly and smiled lightly. I should have scored high enough to graduate, but that's it. I never really aimed to attend an elite university or an influential academy, so I don't really care. It's not like attending a university or academy would help me anyway, he replied, only to slow down when he realized that he was blabbering. His eyes narrowed, and he squinted while looking at the fierce beauty, who continued to smile at him with a glint in her eyes. She is doing something. Is that the effect of an artifact or the power of her soul trait? Don't worry, kiddo. I approached you because I hope you can consider applying to the Sapphire Lake military academies and sitting for their entrance exam. If you get accepted, you will have more options once the military drafts all lords and adventurers, the fierce beauty said. It sounded as if her words were not important, but Michael's expression changed drastically. They didn't even know each other, yet she threw an invitation at him, out of nowhere at that. Multiple thoughts flashed through his mind, and none of them put his mind at ease. Military drafting. We're currently not at war, or are we? Sapphire Lake Military Academy, it's a pretty big one on. Where was it again? Michael wondered, just to shake his head and slap his cheeks. How was the location of the military academy important right now? Why would she tell me about the military academy and a possible draft call? Who is she, in the first place? Something was fishy, that was for sure. However, Michael was not able to speak his thoughts aloud. Something was holding him back. My score won't be high enough to join the Sapphire Lake Military Academy, even if I want to apply, he said instead. The fierce beauty's smile widened in response. You should have a decent score. If you achieve something special as a new lord in the Origin Expanse, I can help you. But why would you? He asked this time, finally able to speak his mind. Michael was certain that he broke through the spell that had been put on him. Yet, instead of staring at him baffled, the fierce beauty's smile turned even brighter. It was vibrant enough to dazzle Michael. "Seems like I was right about you," she muttered, taking a big stride closer to him before she made a big announcement. "I like you, kiddo." Michael took an equally big stride backward with one thought that couldn't be more true in his mind. This woman is definitely sick in the head. "Sorry, but you are not exactly my type," Michael apologized. He was not exactly apologetic, but the fierce beauty didn't seem to be the type of person who accepted getting rejected. Oddly enough, she didn't seem to mind the rejection. On the contrary, the fierce beauty began to chuckle as if she enjoyed it. "Then what is your type?" she asked nonchalantly. "The type that is not sick in the head, probably," he thought, but didn't speak aloud. Michael gave a light shrug and changed the topic. "I don't think we've met before. You don't really look like a teacher either," Michael pointed out. "So why are you telling me all of this?" He had a lot more to say, but he decided to stop right there. His first impression of the fierce beauty was pretty simple. She had a few loose screws, but she was powerful and with highly influential backing. She hummed lightly while keeping her gaze locked on Michael. Her intense gaze would intimidate most, yet Michael didn't seem to fazed. He looked her in the eye and returned her gaze with a tinge of suspicion and curiosity. "Let's just say that I felt like you're more interesting than my brother's fiancé," she revealed. "You seem like a hard-working youth who can overcome the lack of a good teacher. Your natural combat awareness is not bad either. Of course, you need a lot of refinement, but that can be done in the Sapphire Lake Military Academy. Is she searching for someone to play around, an idiot without backing? Well, I won't be that bastard, sorry sis." Michael could say that, but that would mean he had to deal with this crazy woman even longer. This woman was just too talkative. He was already mentally exhausted due to the final examination, and that dream, or whatever it was, that he saw bothered him quite a lot. "Why are you telling me all of this?" Michael wanted to return home and read the records in the tattered book once again. He could find out more about the dream he had or witness another snippet of his ancestors' past. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" The fierce beauty wanted to ask upon seeing the impatience in Michael's eyes, but she remained silent, unlike her usual self. "Why did I even approach him? I shouldn't have told him to apply at the Sapphire Lake Military Academy either. What if he won't manifest a war rune? No, even if he manifests a war rune, there is no reason for me to invite him." The fierce beauty sighed deeply. She was not sure why she had done what she did. She had only reluctantly arrived at the Golden Sun province after being forced by her parents told her to look at her younger brother's potential fiancé. However, what she saw disappointed her greatly. Jasmine Blade, her potential sister-in-law, was born in the renowned sword master family of the Blade and was definitely beautiful, but that was already it. She received enough resources and guidance from well-known instructors to rank in the province's top 5. However, everyone with discernible eyes could tell that Jasmine didn't try her best during the final examination. Her ambition was non-existent, and one could tell that she was spoon-fed everything necessary to rank at the top without even trying. Was such a woman truly fit to join their family? On the other hand, the young man in front of her was a sly fox and a fighter at the same time. Michael Fang belonged to the middle class, his parents' whereabouts unknown, and his brother busy being the lord of a small territory in the Origin Expanse. Michael gave his utmost to the most prestigious elite school in the Golden Sun province. Unfortunately, he faced his classmates bullying upon ranking first in the first exam. As a result, his grades slumped to the bottom of the class, barely enough to advance. Nobody thought that Michael would be able to graduate, not even his own homeroom teacher. But that was a grave mistake. He may not rank first because he didn't have the necessary resources and training which his classmates received since they were young, but he would certainly give the top rankers some tough competition. That was what she found out about Michael after she heard his homeroom teacher speak ill about him in the observation room. She just wanted to gauge his worth and look at him at first. However, something about him piqued her interest. Michael did his best to adapt to his environment, make use of the little resources he was given, and attack when the opportunity arrived. His patience and work ethic were impeccable, and it was something the military needed. It was much more interesting to see someone struggle with blazing flames of determination and ambition in their eyes than watching the spoon-fed idiots fighting amongst each other half-heartedly. After mulling over it for a while, she held out her right hand and manifested a holographic screen. Give me your contact details. You can ignore my invitation if you don't like it. Maybe I came across as too pushy, the fierce beauty said, following her gut feeling. Her vibrant smile had been replaced with a light, genuine smile. She toned down a bit, understanding that her excitement and interest had been a little bit over the top. There was no need to pounce on Michael, not when things were still uncertain. She might be mistaken about him, but she felt that this was very unlikely. Michael tilted his head, but then nodded. It was not as if it was hard to procure his contact details in the era of technology and Starnet. Sharing them with the unknown lady didn't pose a threat. By the way, my name is Alice Zenobia, she said suddenly, grasping the hand Michael held out. A total weirdo, he thought, but the corners of his lips curled upward, even if it was just a little. I'm Michael Fang. His trip home didn't take too long. He ordered a flying shuttle to bring him home, which was a 5-minute flight through the aerial paths of Laki, the province's capital. Laki was a big city with several million residents. It was a city that was alive all day, with crowded shopping malls and bustling restaurants. Michael lived near the central area, in a big family apartment that had 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, 2 bathrooms, a big living room, and a crowded office. In a city like Laki, where the estate prices were high enough to cause constipation, this was already luxurious. The apartment's value was in the tens of millions. Fortunately, his parents paid off their loan early on. Despite not being at home at all, his parents sent a monthly allowance high enough to cover all the expenses. Thus, a message from them every other month was more than enough for Michael. Danny is not here. Maybe he will be there tomorrow. No, he is probably busy with his territory, Michael mumbled when he realized that his brother was not home either. He didn't expect anything from his parents, but he felt a slight sting in his chest because of the absence of his brother. Time flows differently inside the Origin Expanse. It's just a birthday, not a life and death situation. Don't act like a weakling, Michael told himself off. He shouldn't act like a spoiled child and instead accept reality. It was better that way. Michael wanted to take a long nap now that he was finally at home, but he chose to enter the office. It was filled with books that Michael had read multiple times by now. In the center of the office was a large wooden table and chair made of similar material, one of the old kinds. Michael sat down on the chair and retrieved the old, tattered book from his backpack. He put the book down on the table and opened it. He began reading through the pages and entered a state of utter focus as he found himself captured by the book. He even lost track of time as he found the contents of the book highly riveting. Yes, I'm certain. That's literally the same as the events in the dream I had. It's literally the same. It was impressive and somehow made sense the more he thought about it. Logic didn't apply to what happened earlier this morning, but then there were so many illogical things that one more thing didn't really make a difference. How can I experience it again? If I can learn something about the Origin Expanse or about our ancestors through these snippets of the past which others don't know about, I should be able to gain an advantage others can only dream about. Michael mumbled to himself. He was deep in thought and didn't even notice the figure that had appeared in the doorframe of the office. Are you still reading the story about that bastard, Michael? A familiar, though judgmental voice reached his ear. Michael flinched, and his heart skipped a beat in shock while his head flicked upward. A smile blossomed on his face just a moment later. You're back, Danny. Why didn't you message me? He exclaimed, forgetting about the tattered book at once. He jumped up and approached his brother with a faint smile. Daniel Fang was only a few years older than him, but he was not often at home because he was busy with his territory. Too many incidents shook his territory in the last few months, forcing him to stay in the Origin Expanse much longer than usual. Danny ruffled through his younger brother's hair with a loving smile. He took a final glance at the old, tattered book and shook his head lightly afterward. I don't really like this book, he muttered under his breath before he added a little loudly. I always feel like he is at fault for our misfortune. Michael understood what his brother meant, but he didn't really want to talk about it. He was not going to fight with his brother now that he was finally back from the Origin Expanse. Their family might be pursued by misfortune, but that could have many reasons. Danny's eyes glimmered suddenly, and he punched Michael lightly on the shoulder. However, Michael had already predicted this. It was always the same with his brother. Danny's punch missed the target by a large margin. Michael's smile widened upon seeing the frown on his brother's face. Danny shot forward with a speed no ordinary human could dream of reaching. He appeared in front of Michael, his flat hand lifted. Smack! His flat hand landed hard on Michael's head. Ugh! Michael slumped on the ground, holding his head in pain. Don't be a crybaby and come down to the training hall. I want to see if you're ready for tomorrow, Danny ordered, his expression a little more serious than before. Michael continued to rub his forehead, but he obeyed. Saying something to anger his brother when he was this serious wouldn't do him any good. With that, Danny turned on his heels. He walked out of the office. If I'm not ready for tomorrow by now, I will never be, Michael muttered to himself. I worked my ass off for this day. It's impossible not to be ready. Michael had made ample preparations for tomorrow. He would turn 18, and his war rune would form as well. Not everyone would manifest a war rune, but the Fangs were a little special in this regard. Since the arrival of the Origin Expanse, the Fangs had always formed a war rune after reaching the required age. Nobody could say for sure why that was the case, but most presumed that it was because of their first ancestor, the bastard. Michael looked a last time at the tattered book on the wooden table before he turned around as well. Legend of the Calamity. It was one of a kind, and harbored the truth behind a tale that would have been forgotten if not for the tattered book. Well, whatever. He left the office and closed the door behind him. In the training hall basement of their apartment complex, two young men with black hair and dark eyes were standing opposite each other. They were wearing combat suits and entered their combat stance at the same time. I will restrict my strength so that you won't cry later, Danny mocked, but Michael just clicked his tongue disapprovingly. Whatever. Michael hated that his brother took it easy. Unfortunately, that was for his good. Danny dashed forward, and their spar began without delay, if one could call it a spar in the first place. Half an hour later, Michael felt as if his entire body had been used as a punching bag. That was not far from reality. His black hair was slick with sweat and dirt, while his face was decorated with purple bruises. As a member of the Fang family, we will have lots of chaos around us, but that can be exploited, Danny nagged when he appeared in front of Michael. You have to make use of your territory's protection barrier when you enter the Origin Expanse. It lasts only 10 days, but that should be more than enough for you. While speaking, Danny retrieved a glass vial from the war rune. He opened the cap and handed Michael the vial. Michael swallowed the red liquid inside it and felt a warm and soothing sensation spread through his body. This is the real deal, he thought, while focusing on the empty glass vial rather than his brother's nagging. Danny was still speaking excitedly. He was way too talkative when it was about topics related to the Origin Expanse. Though it was not as if Michael hated it. It was just Danny's nagging that got a little bit on his nerves. Remember, 2 hours over there is 1 hour over here. Don't get the dates wrong. If you won't come back in time, I'm going to kill you. Michael meekly listened to his brother's nagging without retorting that he knew all of that already. His brother was in his element right now, and nobody could stop him, probably not even divine interventions. Danny, it's fine. Just let me have dinner and sleep. I will be fine tomorrow. I brought some food from Jenny's diner. We can eat that if you are, Danny said lightly, just to see that Michael had already gotten up from the ground the moment he heard Jenny's diner. Let's go. In the following hour, the brothers devoured enough food to feed a family for days. However, that amount was nothing to the brothers. They'd always been gluttons. How could anyone resist great food? That was blasphemy. Michael returned to his room after dinner. He was tired from today's events and fell into a deep slumber quite easily. Only a few hours later, Michael woke up with the first rays of sunlight shining through the window. It was still early in the morning, but he was already wide awake. The back of his right hand itched, pulling him out of the well-needed sleep. War rune. A small, sphere-shaped rune formed on the back of his right hand. It was smaller than a marble and could easily be mistaken as a uniquely shaped mole. Today was his 18th birthday, which was also one of the most important days in his life. His war rune had formed, establishing a direct connection between him and the Origin Expanse. Now, the only thing left to do was to enter the Origin Expanse to confirm and reinforce his connection with the war rune. Michael quickly showered and changed into a combat suit before he rushed downstairs. The first 10 days in the Origin Expanse were the most important. He had to make use of them to create his path to a great future, and having a filling breakfast was the best way to ensure that the day started on the right track. Michael finished everything he could find in the fridge, and a bright smile formed on his face. His heart was beating wildly in excitement, and he didn't even notice that he was subconsciously urging the war rune to open the gate to the Origin Expanse. As a result, space cracked open, and a radiant light illuminated the kitchen. The crack expanded in size until it was large enough to let Michael through. Michael stared blankly at the gate. He swallowed his saliva and took a stride toward it. So beautiful! However, it was just a moment later that a familiar voice rang in his ears. Oi, 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 what the hell do you think you're doing so early in the morning? Danny's hurried footsteps resounded through the entire house. Feeling astonished and confused, Michael halted in his tracks. He was just having breakfast. That's not a crime. Danny reached the kitchen a second later, staring at Michael with bloodshot eyes. His hair and clothes were disheveled, and it looked like he had a rough night. Do Tisku wants something? Michael asked incomprehensibly. His mouth was filled to the brim, but it was easy to understand what he was talking about. He handed Danny one of the croissants he found in the kitchen. It's okay. I will share my loot with you. Michael smiled at his brother, who groaned in frustration. You bastard. I thought you got too excited, and Danny grumbled, snacking on the croissant while glaring at Michael. It was not difficult to see that Michael was too excited and could not wait to enter the Origin Expanse anymore. Michael was too eager and was bobbing his head up and down restlessly. Danny shook his head, but he couldn't take offense at his brother's action. He himself was the same 4 years ago. He had always felt guilty for leaving his younger brother alone to build his territory in the Origin Expanse. He was not home a lot, but Michael never seemed to mind. How do I even deserve such a good little brother? Michael always understands me, and he never complained when I wasn't there for him. Daniel marveled while watching his oblivious brother savor his last meal before it was time to enter the Origin Expanse. The back of Danny's right hand glowed lightly as he flipped his hand with a light motion. A thin longsword manifested in front of him. Ha! Michael nearly died of a heart attack as he stumbled backward when the sword manifested in front of Danny. He took a second to regain his composure and curiously took a few steps forward. Is that an artifact? It was the first time Michael was seeing an artifact up close. While the thin longsword didn't look like anything special, it was a treasure if it was actually an artifact. The difference between artifacts and ordinary weapons was quite simple. Artifacts were created with special materials, which allowed lords and adventurers to bind them to their war runes. That way, they could enjoy enhancement effects. For example, his endurance was likely to increase by binding a shield artifact to his war rune. The enhancement effect would vary according to the quality and tier of the bound artifact. Nonetheless, an enhancement in combat prowess, no matter how low, was extremely helpful. It's a 5-star tier 0 artifact called Tiger Fang. When I saw it in the marketplace, I was reminded of you, Danny explained shortly before he handed Michael the blade carefully. As long as you can bind it to yourself, Tiger Fang will be yours. What was his brother talking about? Did Danny rob a bank to afford Tiger Fang, or did he sell his territory? Michael was curious, but he was not sure if he wanted to know the answer. Danny, what the hell did you do? Even if Tiger Fang was only a tier 0 artifact, also called tierless because it could be bound by any kind of war rune, it was of exceptional quality. 5 stars meant that it was of epic quality. It was super rare. Why didn't you use that money to expand your territory? You could have easily doubled the size of your territory with the fortune you wasted on that, Michael shouted even before he realized it. He didn't want his brother to suffer because of him. However, upon seeing Danny's stern expression, the next words died on Michael's tongue. He couldn't force himself to speak aloud. Take it and try to bind it to your war rune. If the toll is too high, I have weapons with a lower rating for you to bind. I don't care what you say about the costs of the artifacts. You need to be as strong as possible to survive in the Origin Expanse. If you reject my help now, you might be dead before you realize your mistake. Danny reprimanded his brother, his voice growing more serious and colder. He was dead serious. If necessary, he would shove the artifacts deep into his brother's throat. Michael had never seen his brother like that. For a moment, he felt like saying something, but he knew better than to argue with Danny. He silently picked up Tiger Fang and willed the war rune to bind the thin longsword. A thin white tentacle-like thread emerged from the war rune. It wiggled uncontrollably, searching for the artifact it was supposed to bind. Michael quietly moved Tiger Fang closer to connect the tentacle-like thread before he observed the next few steps carefully. Even his brother stared at the process intently. Good thing that he is not as restless as I was when I bound my first artifact. Daniel Fang thought with a bitter expression on his face as he recalled his own stupidity. The pain was forever branded in his mind. Michael's war rune bound Tiger Fang slowly, and the process lasted for quite a while. It could have been done instantaneously, but Michael willed the war rune to take its time. Meanwhile, his body's temperature slowly increased as well. A warm, fuzzy sensation engulfed his entire body. It was comfortable. Unfortunately, this warm and soothing sensation turned into searing heat after a few minutes. Michael could sense drastic enhancement in his physical strength, but he was also painfully aware that he was reaching his limit. A little bit more, and I won't be able to handle it, he thought just before he slumped to the ground. His back was drenched in cold sweat, and his shirt was plastered to his body, but he smiled foolishly. The white tentacle-like strand of the war rune returned to where it belonged. I made it, though just barely. An epic tearless artifact is all I can handle right now. This is crazy. Michael had yet to test his current prowess, but he felt like his agility and strength had at least doubled in power. His senses had also been enhanced. An epic artifact is truly special. I will repay you for this treasure. Just wait and watch, brother, he swore in his heart, clenching his fist. Closing his eyes, Michael focused on his consciousness, just like he often read in the books about War Rune and the Origin Expanse. He used his will to transform Tiger Fang into a ball of light that fused back into the War Rune. Knowing the basics and having sound theoretical knowledge was a great advantage. It didn't indicate that he should be perfect in the practical aspect, but it helped nonetheless. In a matter of minutes, he was able to see a small light hidden in the deepest parts of his body. The light is the War Rune, isn't it? Michael wondered. The ball of light that belonged to Tiger Fang had transformed into an illusionary shadow that revolved around the small light. That was another effect of artifact. The enhancement effect provided by artifacts would never fade off. He was fine with it as long as his body could withstand the effect, which he could barely. It was merely an external aid, an enhancement granted through the artifacts, but it was still amazing. His survival rate increased drastically. As long as the enhancement effect was not too strong for his body that could cause him to collapse or splatter into countless pieces, he would be fine. The thin longsword was perfect for him, and so was the enhancement he had received. Swords were considered a jack of all trades, which was exactly what Michael needed. He could end up in a desert, in the midst of a savanna, or even in a tundra region upon entering the Origin Expanse. Luck was the deciding factor, which was usually bad for the Fang family. His territory could be anywhere, and having a sword around was probably the most helpful. Of course, there were always circumstances in which even the mightiest weapons would turn useless. However, that was not something Michael wanted to think about right now. If you think you can handle more artifacts, I have a few tierless, starless, and one-star artifacts that won't burden you. I'm already at my limit, thanks, Danny, Michael said in a weak voice. Talking seemed like a perilous task right now, so he took a few breaths and smiled at his brother, knowing deep down that his brother was just worried about him. The storage space in your war rune is non-existent right now, so I can only support you this way. This is so frustrating, Danny mumbled to himself. Otherwise, I would have also given you a bunch of resources and summoning scrolls. Since when have you started doting on me so much? Did someone replace you with my disciplined and bad-tempered brother? Michael wondered, but he just smiled at Danny. It was rare to see his brother nervous like this. Michael didn't mind the change in his brother's attitude, but it was strangely out of place for his elder brother to be so frazzled. Usually, his brother was busy being in the Origin Expanse or thinking about it. Only when they trained in the sword or gobbled down family-sized meals by themselves did his brother's thoughts drift away from the Origin Expanse. This obsession his brother had developed was something Michael was worried about, at first. However, right now, he was curious to know what the Origin Expanse must have done to his brother to turn him into a helpless addict of the Origin Expanse. Michael focused on adjusting his mind and body to the enhancement he received from the epic artifact for the next half an hour before he approached the White Gate. After several years of hard work, it was finally time to enter the Origin Expanse. Michael was overflowing with excitement, but he was also nervous. Everything could go terribly wrong. He would have loved to carry a few more things to the Origin Expanse, but only the clothes he wore, the artifacts bound to the War Rune, and the items stored inside the War Rune could be brought to the Origin Expanse. Even carrying a backpack was useless, since it would disappear into thin air. As for guns, grenades, and other scientific weapons made outside the Origin Expanse, they wouldn't work inside. I'll take your leave now. Don't wait for me and take care of your territory. I will only return after the protection barrier is lifted, and I'm certain that my territory won't be bulldozed once I leave, Michael said. He smiled lightly at his brother, who recited all the warnings and instructions to be followed for the 100,000th time. If you don't feel prepared for the Origin Expanse, just abandon your territory and become an adventurer. I will gladly accept you in my territory. If your soul trait is shit, don't feel burdened. Just give it your best. I know that you will make the best choice. You're possessed, aren't you? Michael groaned inwardly while continuing to smile. He kept glancing at the luminescent white gate that radiated an even brighter light. The material of the arched gate was smooth and, if not for the bright light engulfing it, one might mistake it for an ordinary modern gate. However, it was much more than that. It was his opportunity for a greater future, a way to turn his family's misfortunes into great opportunities. He stepped through the white gate without saying anything further. Everything he wanted to say had been said. Now it was time to stand up for himself. A moment later, he disappeared inside the white gate. Meanwhile, Daniel stared at the white gate that dispersed into countless white particles not long after. Please get a good territory, Mike. As long as your territory is good, everything can be managed. At first, everything around Michael was black. He couldn't see anything, and the only thing he felt was a strong suctioning force pulling him somewhere. He was even more confused when white stars emerged all around him. Space twisted not long after, and he had to close his eyes to make sure that his breakfast would stay where it was supposed to be. His sense of time disappeared slowly, making it impossible to tell how much time had passed when he opened his eyes again. But that didn't matter, because he had arrived in the Origin Expanse. A faint gust brushed past his face, and sunlight shone through the canopy of towering trees around him. It was warm and humid, furthermore. Everything seemed alive rather than the surrounding filled with towering skyscrapers. He found himself surrounded by unknown terrain. But instead of staring blankly at the lively scenery around him, Michael held his head while focusing on the figure who was approaching him slowly. Fluffy! His eyes widened in shock, and they began to sparkle brightly. Is that why Danny likes the Origin Expanse? Michael could tell that his surroundings were full of life the moment he emerged from the gate. The sound of birds chirping and monsters roaring reached his ears, making him feel excited. Compared to Danny's territory in the desert region, this is a treasure trove. Amazing. Michael felt that he was quite lucky. However, his attention was forcefully pulled over to the figure standing not too far away from him. A young woman with long silver hair and large eyes of the same color approached him with a subtle smile on her face. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. A white apron was tied around her waist. It was a practical and comfortable uniform to work in, and it looked great as well. Not only was she wearing a maid uniform, but the young woman was also drop-dead gorgeous, and she had fluffy ears. She has a tail as well, Michael shouted in his mind when he saw the black-silver striped tail wagging behind her. The maid's cheeks were a tinge red, but Michael didn't even notice that. He was too baffled about the appearance of a demi-human right after he arrived at the Origin Expanse. To think that I would have the chance of meeting a member of another race so soon. Who the hell says that our family is unlucky? This is definitely a blessing. It was commonly known that the Origin Expanse was a mythical place with boundless treasures and countless races. But that didn't mean it was easy to encounter other intelligent races. Usually, intelligent races stayed with their own people. What did Danny say last time? If I cannot handle it, I should just give up my territory and become an adventurer. He can forget about that. I have a lovely feline demi-human maid. Michael could tell that his mind was going wild, but he was relieved. He had been dreading being besieged by monster hordes the moment he entered the Origin Expanse. After all, Michael was told to expect the worst. Why did you have to make me feel so worried me so much, brother? My lord, I have been waiting for you. The silver-haired maid greeted him with a deep bow. I am your maid and the first resident of your territory. My name is Tiara, and it is my mission to serve you until death, my lord. Tiara politely introduced herself. She didn't dare to look into his eyes and kept her head lowered. Michael never had subjects, and he was always the one who was considered less worthy than his classmates. Thus, he was a little baffled by his maid's obedience. It's good to have a maid, but it would be better if she was a little bit more relaxed. The tension she radiates is frightening, he thought before he shook his head. Tiara looked to be around his age. It shouldn't be too difficult to break the ice between them. My name is Michael, but you can call me whatever you're the most comfortable with. Michael introduced himself before he asked, if it's not too rude to ask, which clan of demi-humans do you belong to? His curiosity had been piqued upon seeing her silver hair and silver cat-like eyes. He was not yet sure how to treat Tiara since he was not accustomed to the mindset of a ruler. But it was not as if he could throw commands at someone he met a minute ago, not yet at least. I have lots of things to learn if I want to become a proper lord. I wonder how long Danny took to adjust to his status as a lord. Being a lord was not easy, but it came with great benefits. Their status was exceptional in society, but that was given. They had their own territory, possessed military might, had more resources at their disposal, and could use their influence to control the natives of the Origin Expanse to a certain extent. To add on top of that, a lord's soul trait was much stronger than that of an adventurer's. But even then, many lords were forced to give up their lands and be stripped of their title, becoming mere adventurers. They paved their way through the Origin Expanse with the power they had accumulated, whether it was alone, as a team, or even in a guild. Some chose to become subordinates of other lords as well. My Sea Clan, why does my lord want to know about this? Tiara asked while stuttering a lot. She gripped her apron so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Was my question inappropriate? Michael wondered. If you don't want to answer, that's fine. I was just curious about what kind of feline demi-human you are. I've heard about the catfolk, but you seem different from them. Your appearance doesn't fit the description I've read either. You have a more noble presence and you're much prettier, he explained calmly. Michael didn't want Tiara to revolt against him right after he entered the Origin Expanse. He had yet to start building his territory. Pretty, Tiara mumbled, her cheeks turning beet red. Am I? Michael was not someone who hid his true thoughts. Most of the time, he spoke them aloud without thinking too much about it. Tiara might be his maid, but it was still a little confusing that she had such a noble presence. The first thought he had when he saw her was that she belonged to royalty. She was very beautiful, with long eyelashes, fair skin, and long, silky hair. Her maid uniform did a poor job of concealing her slender figure, the fact that she was well-trained and that her body was well-proportioned, curvaceous where it had to be. It didn't make sense that someone like her would become his servant. Michael was quite interested in Tiara since she was his first subject and the first member of a foreign race he encountered. He had many questions, but he chose to ignore them for the time being. Other things were of more importance. Let's see what we got here. He turned around to take a good look at his territory. The protection barrier was not difficult to see. It was a huge, semi-transparent barrier that surrounded his territory perfectly. Nobody could enter his territory without his permission, probably not even deities. Michael didn't want to test the limit of the protection barrier, but he had heard and read enough about it to feel safe and sound. 1,000 meters in each direction. That should be more than enough space for the next 10 days, Michael thought as he tried to measure the size of the protection barrier. The protection barrier was standardized, but Michael still wanted to make sure that everything was as it was supposed to be. After being satisfied with the barrier, his gaze moved forward. An ordinary summoning gate, a wooden manor for the Lord, a maid, the protection barrier, and a humongous, densely packed rainforest that surrounds the clearing. Looks like my territory is in an acceptable position, and I'm not missing anything. Nice. Michael found himself in the center of a small clearing. The clearing was located in the middle of a densely grown rainforest. It was a rare and precious spot. The open space was surrounded by tall trees and thick vegetation. It was illuminated by rays of sunlight that had been filtered through the canopy. It created a warm and inviting atmosphere. This was one of the best places for lodging, hunting, and agriculture. I won't have any problems with water scarcity either. Food should be quite easy to find in the rainforest, and I can cut down the trees to build more lodgings once the number of subjects increases. Nice. The more Michael looked at his surroundings, the happier he became. It was a great decision to enter the Origin Expanse as early as possible. He gave himself a pat on the back for his decision as his gaze returned to the center of the clearing. The summoning gate stood there grandly, with its simple yet imposing appearance. It was a large metal ring with various symbols inscribed on its surface. The center of the summoning gate contained a shimmering pool of energy, elevating its appearance even further. Michael's eyes stared blankly at the highly technologically advanced summoning gate. I want to test it out. His eyes seemed to scream, but he forced himself to calm down. First work, then enjoyment. With that in mind, he turned his attention to the wooden manor. It was a large and steady residence made primarily of wood. It had a grand entrance with a veranda supported by tall pillars. Inside, the manor had a high ceiling, large windows, and spacious rooms that were mostly empty save for the bare minimum. There were enough beds and furniture to accommodate over a dozen people in the manor. That was good enough to start with. Other lords may think of the wooden manor as a means to show off their prestige in front of their subjects, but Michael was more concerned about the safety and living conditions of his subjects. Happy subjects were hard-working subjects. It would take a while before he could construct more residences. Thus, the wooden manor would turn into a temporary shelter for all of his subjects. Once he was done with his inspection of the manor, Michael returned outside. Tiara was already waiting for him at the entrance of the wooden manor, clutching her maid uniform tightly. She took a few deep breaths when Michael returned. "Are you still interested?" she asked shyly while studying the ground. "What is she talking about? Interested in what?" "If you're still interested in getting to know my clan," she added quietly. Tiara kept looking to the ground, nibbling at her lower lip. "I knew it. It was a mistake. Of course, I still want to know more about your clan. This is very important to me," Michael said without hesitation. A lord's territory was his heart and soul, and his people were a precious asset, almost like a family. The more he knew about his people, their wishes and desires, the easier it would be to lead them in the future. New information was always welcome as well. Tiara blushed when she heard Michael's words. She gathered her courage once again and revealed her origin for the first time in a while. "I belong to the Silverfang tiger folk." Silverfang tiger folk? I've never heard of them. Michael was quite surprised. Even if demi-humans were not common encounters for humans, most of them had been recorded in the Index of Races. Michael had read all known volumes of the Index of Races in school, yet he hadn't heard of Tiara's clan before. However, while it was quite surprising, it was not impossible to encounter unknown races. After all, the universe was filled with countless races. What a wonderful name. My family's name is Fang, while your people are the Silverfang tiger folk. Isn't that nice? Michael pointed out with a radiant smile on his face. Even if he was not sure what was going on with Tiara, or why she was so shy and hesitant, Michael decided that he would listen to her once she was ready. Making her comfortable around himself was more important right now. That would make it easier to talk to her about his position in the vast lands of the Origin Expanse and other important information he had to find out. Michael was still excited about his new territory. He had expected the worst and was positively surprised about the territory he had been given. How could he not be happy right now? Was it a crime to be happy? Most certainly not. Tiara had been nervous all day. She found out that her lord would arrive and expected the worst, just like Michael. But upon understanding that he was genuinely curious about her and that he wouldn't force her to tell him about herself, she loosened up a little. Subconsciously, the corners of her lips curled up, and she lifted her head to look at Michael's face for the first time since he arrived. Seeing the overwhelming happiness radiating from her lord, Tiara's heart skipped a beat. My lord is wonderful. Flooded with excitement and hope, Michael completely forgot to do something extremely important. He forgot to continue researching his ancestors' book and the reason why he could see a snippet of the past. But there was also something else he nearly forgot out of excitement. Oh my, how stupid can I be? He mentally chided himself and gasped in shock. My fortune summoning scroll and the soul trait awakening crystal. Less than half an hour passed since Michael had entered the Origin Expanse, but he felt that his entire life had been turned upside down in a good way. He didn't feel weird being surrounded by a vast and densely packed rainforest overflowing with life, instead of a concrete jungle void of the liveliness he experienced in the Origin Expanse for the first time. Rather than feeling odd, Michael was happy and full of curiosity. He had his first encounter with a foreign life form, a demi-human, who was not only beautiful but also his maid. Tiara held a tattered leather scroll in her left hand and a fist-sized crystal in her right hand. She pushed them in his direction and exclaimed, I kept them safely, Master. Master, didn't she call me Lord before? Maybe she likes that more, whatever, Michael wondered, but he didn't mind the way Tiara addressed him. The fortune summoning scroll and his soul trait awakening crystal were more important. Every lord would receive a fortune summoning scroll and soul trait awakening crystal upon entering the Origin Expanse the first time. Summoning scrolls were items created by the Origin Expanse with the use of data acquired from beings inside the Origin Expanse. They were used to resurrect beings that died in the Origin Expanse by summoning them. The summoned subjects were given a star rating according to their innate talent, the quality of their retained memories, techniques, power, and so on. They would become the Lord's subject and had to obey their will, which was confirmed through the link of loyalty. It was a little cruel, but everyone entering the Origin Expanse knew about the risks of entering and dying in the Origin Expanse. There were two ways to prevent becoming a Lord's subject. Either don't enter the Origin Expanse in the first place, or make sure that you wouldn't die. The Origin Expanse was the only place Michael could use to become strong enough to make sure that no one from outer space could kill him with a snap of their fingers. He didn't want to stay idle at home and wait for foreign races to obliterate everything he held dear. That was not his style. Thus, he would rather give his utmost and make sure that he could die without any regrets, even if that would happen inside the Origin Expanse. He accepted the risk and embraced it tightly. Thanks, Tiara, Michael said with a smile. He retrieved the fortune summoning scroll and the soul trait awakening crystal from her. The latter glowed brightly the moment Michael's right hand came in contact with it. The glow was faint, but it was enough to startle Michael and Tiara. I don't have to will the war rune to awaken my soul trait, Michael wondered before he was surprised by a flood of information swamping his mind. The soul trait awakening crystal had been triggered, and its miraculous power was unleashed. Michael closed his eyes, and he entered his consciousness. The white light in the deepest part of his being shone brightly, but something was changing. A symbol with complex lines and overlapping patterns manifested inside the white light. It showed a golden hand and countless star-like particles of various colors, sizes, and shapes that were attracted by the hand. A stigma, so that's my soul trait. Soul traits were also considered the dormant power of the soul. They existed in various forms, granting the ability to transform, control winds, become a master blacksmith, and much more. Soul traits were also ranked in accordance with their might, utility, and potential, using the star rating. A weak soul trait had only 1 or 2 stars, while an epic soul trait had 5 stars in the ranking. Soul traits were one of the most important aspects of entering the Origin Expanse, and their utility and star rating were extremely important. After all, most lords and adventurers had only 1 soul trait. It was publicly known that it was impossible to increase the number of soul traits. Forget about changing their soul trait. It was not possible to change their soul, after all. Well, I know for a fact that people with multiple soul traits exist, Michael thought with a knowing smile, recalling the old, tattered book in the office. This was also what made it easier for him to accept the bitter reality, which was unveiled in front of him right now. The flood of information is such a mess, so let's see. My soul trait is called extraction, and it is a HM. It's a 2-star soul trait. A deep frown spread across his entire face. He first sighed, then he clenched his fist. A 2-star soul trait was not too bad. 2 stars meant that his soul trait was of low elite quality. Most lords and adventurers awoke a 1-star soul trait, or their soul didn't possess any dormant power in the first place. Michael's 2-star soul trait was clearly in the top 10%. However, he never compared himself to the norm because it didn't make any sense. Nobody in our family ever awoke a dormant power with such a low star rating. Cursed with misfortune, the only advantage his ancestors possessed were high-star soul traits. For example, his brother had a 5-star soul trait, which allowed him to survive the peril thrown at him in the Origin Expanse. Does that mean I am misfortunate, and I have a bad soul trait? Michael wondered, but he quickly shook his head. No, the soul trait is not exactly bad. Out of the vast flood of information that had entered his mind, Michael had deciphered a little chunk. That gave him a better understanding of his soul trait. He could extract anything from everything using his soul trait. What did that mean? Well, it was pretty simple. Michael squatted down, his right hand hovering less than 30 centimeters above the grass. Tiara looked at Michael, feeling a little confused, but she didn't utter a single word. She figured that Michael wanted to try something after the soul trait awakening. Crystal crumbled in his hand. Extraction, he said out loud in an attempt to direct his energy toward the desired area. It was not necessary to use incantations to activate one's soul trait, but as someone who had just awoken his soul trait, Michael was not even sure what he had to do. The new information in his head was still being processed, so he had to use the trial and error method. A golden light conjured in his palm. The energy inside him was quickly drained, which made him feel as if he was being squeezed like a lemon. The golden light dispersed after 2 seconds, and a bright smile blossomed on Michael's face. He turned his hand around and looked at the extracted substance in front of him. It was soil, perfectly ordinary soil, but without a single blade of grass or pebble. It was exactly what Michael wanted to have extracted, just soil. As long as I use extraction properly, I should be able to make some gains. It shouldn't be impossible to extract pure iron from iron ore or essences from elemental crystals once I get stronger. A lord's soul trait grew stronger with his territory and by increasing their war runes tier. Meanwhile, adventurers could only increase their soul trait's power by focusing on their war runes tier. That meant Michael could increase the utility of his low-star soul trait by becoming a stronger lord. The soul trait might not help him in combat, but it would be quite useful when it came to managing his territory. Let's try it again. Extraction. 2 seconds later, he held 3 pebbles in his hand. He extracted them from the ground in front of him. In the worst case, I will use it to remove weed from my farming land, once I get farmers, seeds, and the necessary tools to farm. Extraction didn't seem to be an overpowered soul trait, but it could have been worse. There was no need to be needlessly pessimistic. There was still a fortune summoning scroll to use. No matter how bad our family's luck is, a fortune summoning scroll cannot deliver a horrible starless soldier. 3 stars should be the minimum. While his brain continued to digest the intel of his soul trait, Michael walked over to the summoning gate. What was it again? Break the seal of the summoning scroll and throw it in the air near the summoning gate. Michael mumbled quietly while doing as he said. He broke the seal of the tattered leather scroll and threw it in the air. For a moment nothing happened, but it was then that the fortune summoning scroll unrolled itself and shot inside the summoning gate's shimmering pool of energy. As a result, the intricate engraving all over the summoning gate began to shine brightly. It was only at this moment that Michael noticed something he had missed out on before. There are 10 empty stars etched on the gate. The summoning gate had a total of 10 stars etched on the metal ring. When a new subject was being summoned, the stars would glow, clearly showing how high the summoned subject's talent was. This was something Michael witnessed for the first time today. The first star glowed up in a faint golden light. 2 stars, 3 stars. 5 stars, 6 stars. When the seventh star began to shine brightly, Michael's heart skipped a beat. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief, and he had to move his hand to close his jaw that had dropped to the ground. 7 stars. Even Tiara was dumbfounded. She blushed in excitement and turned to Michael. Master, a heroic summon. Your first summoned subject is a hero. Damn, Michael thought, as he watched a figure walking out of the summoning gate's energy pool. It's actually a hero. Chapter 10, Hero Summon. Master is so lucky. This is wonderful, Tiara exclaimed excitedly, clapping her hands like a seal while her tail swished around excitedly. Is she that excited for me? Michael wondered, unable to hide his smile either. He had yet to get fully accustomed to a life as a lord with territory in a wild and untamed world. But he knew that a 7-star summon was equivalent to a sure-shot ticket to power and prosperity. Michael was happy, of course. Why wouldn't he be? However, something bothered him. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he had a weird feeling that something was amiss. Meanwhile, the war rune on the back of his hand glowed faintly. A connection was formed between Michael and his new summon. The connection made him feel as if someone touched his soul gently. It was warm and soothing. Is that how the link of loyalty feels like? He wondered before his mind blanked out as the hero stepped out of the energy pool of the summoning gate. Wielding a silver spear and wearing black leather armor, the heroic summon stood tall and proud in front of the gate. His gaze traveled across the clearing calmly, taking in his surroundings until his dark eyes landed on Michael. The corners of the hero's lips curled up and he began to move toward him. I am Cleve Fenrir, but you can just call me Fenrir. Let me be of your service, my lord. The hero, Fenrir, introduced himself with a polite smile. He bowed his head in front of Michael. However, Michael had yet to regain his senses. So that is a hero, my first summoned subject. Fenrir had long black hair tied back into a man bun, dark eyes that seemed to analyze everything in the surrounding, and a well-trained physique that had been tempered over the course of years. Cleve Fenrir was certainly a powerhouse, even though his tier had been reset after the resurrection. His presence was enough to make Michael's hair stand up on its end. Fenrir was the one bowing to Michael, yet he felt like he was the prey, while Fenrir was the predator waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Most heroes are flashy or overwhelmingly confident in their capabilities, which makes most lords face difficulties in controlling them. But it looks like this one is not a show-off and not too full of himself. He knows what he is capable of, but he doesn't seem to be arrogant. Did he enter the Origin Expanse just for the excitement and adrenaline rush a fantasy world can provide? How long has it been since he died? What did he achieve? Michael had never heard about the Fenrir family or any famous personality called Cleve Fenrir. That was a little odd, because he had researched most families to know what they were capable of, in case he summoned one of their deceased ancestors. Is he a self-made powerhouse with a powerful soul trait, or was his family purged? Well, not that it matters right now. The name Fenrir pulled some strings in his mind. It was as if he should have known Cleve Fenrir. That was a little weird, but it was not too out of the ordinary. There are many well-known figures in the human races, though most of them die miserably. I might have heard about him in passing when I searched the forum and read books about the myths of mankind. Michael chose not to dwell on it for long. He didn't want to waste his time overthinking either way. It was great that he had summoned a heroic summon and that the summon seemed to be loyal to him as well. However, he was still a new lord who had yet to find out anything about his territory. Michael wanted to change that as soon as possible. My name is Michael. I hope you don't feel offended that I summoned you. He introduced himself calmly. It was important to gauge the reaction of his subjects after he mentioned he was the reason of their resurrection. Some might hate him for being summoned, while others would feel relieved and happy. However, at the end of the day, his subjects would feel a certain degree of loyalty and protectiveness toward him because of the link of loyalty. That meant they were unlikely to attack him, even if they hated him for resurrecting them as his subjects. Gaining his subjects' trust and unwavering loyalty wasn't easy either. Thus, he had to figure out more about them to make sure that his subjects, including Fenrir, would be willing to fight for him and his territory without any qualms. If his subjects weren't willing to work hard, his territory would never prosper. Furthermore, what was the use of a high military might if nobody listened to his commands. It may seem far-fetched for a new lord like Michael to bother thinking about the loyalty of his subjects to such a high degree, but he felt that it was very important. He had read more than enough reports about subjects rioting in their lord's territory, overthrowing his rule, and executing their lord. Just thinking about it was enough to make him shudder and make goosebumps appear all over his body. Fenrir lifted his head after hearing Michael's introduction. He looked at the young man for a few seconds and stepped back. "How may I be of your service?" Cleve asked, while maintaining his disciplined stance. His attitude changed a little, which made it seem as if Fenrir had accepted his lord as a superior existence. Michael nodded his head in response to this change in attitude. It would be great if the hero's loyalty would increase rapidly. The protection barrier around my territory will be sustained for the next 10 days. Scout the surrounding area and bait monsters close to the barrier. Hunt them down while using the barrier's protection to the fullest. You should be able to increase your tier and rank much faster doing so, Michael ordered after a moment of consideration. Fenrir nodded his head before he left to complete the mission. His responsiveness is a little slow, but that should be solved once his loyalty increases. He won't question my commands anymore by then. Michael's eyes were glued on Fenrir's retreating figure. He watched the heroic summon intently as gusts of wind brushed past Fenrir. Well, he certainly looks like a powerhouse. He has charisma and presence. Shaking his head, Michael decided to wait until Fenrir returned with his first prey. He chose to focus more on the connection that had been built between him and the hero. The link of loyalty is not strong. No wonder lords have to pay attention to their subjects' actions, Michael mumbled aloud, still thinking about the possibility of his subjects executing him if he was to do something extremely stupid. All summons will be connected to their lord's war rune. This way, you can perceive your subject's strength and loyalty more easily, Master, Tiara explained, thinking that Michael didn't know much about the link of loyalty. She was tailing him like a shadow since he emerged from the gate, and she intended to continue to stay by his side. That was her task as the Lord's maid. Michael nodded his head, faintly after hearing her, as understanding dawned upon him. So that's how it is. He looked at Tiara for a second or two and tilted his head. She seemed to realize something and gasped in shock. The sound of her hurried footsteps reached his ears, and the next moment, Michael found Tiara grasping his right hand tightly before she closed her eyes. His war rune began to glow, and Michael felt a link slowly forming between them. It was much stronger than the connection with Cleve Fenrir, and the link seemed to pulsate as well. Why is her link firmer and stronger? His eyes flicked in the direction the heroic summon had disappeared in before he diverted his attention back to Tiara. The glowing rune on the back of her right hand attracted his attention. Fenrir doesn't have a war rune because he is now considered a native. Doesn't that mean Tiara is not a native of the Origin Expanse? How was she chosen as my maid? That's weird. Creating a link of loyalty with both Cleve Fenrir and Tiara increased his strength. Precisely, it increased the power of his soul trait. It was only a minuscule increase in its efficiency, but Michael could still feel it. That explains why Lord's soul traits are much stronger than the soul trait of adventurers. The explanations always sounded weird, but it makes sense, I guess. After his new findings, only half an hour passed before Fenrir returned, dragging a bloody body behind him. I got one. The corpse of a large, heavily built cat with a yellowish-brown leather coat and black spots lay in front of Michael. It had a gemstone embedded in its forehead, which made it easy for Michael to recall what type of monster it was. A fully matured gem jaguar. That's a low Tier 1 monster, Michael mumbled to himself. He turned to Fenrir and asked aloud, "Did you see many gem jaguars in the surrounding forest?" Several deep gashes were spread across the gem jaguar's body, which made it clear that even a heroic summon such as Fenrir was not able to kill the Tier 1 monster in a single strike. Michael hadn't expected something like that in the first place, but he got a bad feeling. Fenrir hadn't been out for long, but he had already found and killed a Tier 1 monster. That could mean Fenrir was lucky and skilled, or it could mean something extremely bad. The entire forest is filled with Tier 1 monsters. Gem jaguars are only one of the many kinds of monsters I encountered while packing alongside the protection barrier. Fenrir informed him. He was not injured, and hadn't used a lot of energy to kill the gem jaguar since he made use of the territory's protection barrier. The entire forest is filled with Tier 1 monsters, Michael wondered before he spoke his concern out loud. You mean the gem jaguar is one of the weakest monsters you encountered? There are no tierless monsters in this area. This is the weakest monster, Fenrir affirmed calmly, pointing at the low Tier 1 gem jaguar. The power threshold of all beings was not only divided into tiers, but was further classified to fit the refinement degree of a tier. This was usually done in 4 ways, using the terms mid, high, peak. Some races used different terms, but it was all the same in the end. Looking at Fenrir should have calmed Michael as well, but the heroic summon's calm attitude was more unnerving than calming to the heart. Tier 1 monster. Is that why I received a sudden burst of energy from Fenrir's link of loyalty? Since Michael had never wielded the energy of the Origin Expanse, he didn't know what he was supposed to feel. He was also not sure how his war rune would react upon getting refined. But from the looks of it, neither was anything special. The refinement of the war rune tingled a little bit, and the energy influx spreading through the link of loyalty was barely perceptible. How the hell is that important now? He shouted at himself in his head. Michael had just found out a shocking fact. Tier 1 monsters surrounded his territory. How could he think about anything else? Usually, a lord started in a region that was mostly inhabited by tierless monsters. In rare cases, there would be Tier 1 monsters in the beginner area of newly appointed lords. Even then, the Tier 1 monsters were rather peaceful in most cases. Unfortunately, it looked like Michael's bad luck struck him fiercely in the gut once again. Would Fenrir be able to kill the gem jaguar without the protection barrier? No, even if he is a heroic summon, he is still tierless, Michael figured, his expression turning sour. Without the protection barrier, his territory would have already been bulldozed by now. That was the most important piece of information he gauged from Fenrir's first hunt, and it was certainly not pleasant. In 10 days he would be dead, and his territory would get razed if he didn't do something to prevent it. I need to do something. If I leave the fate of my territory hanging like this, it's only a matter of time before my journey ends miserably before it even started. Leaving everything to Fenrir didn't feel right either. However, Michael didn't want to expose Tiger Fang, not right now. It was as if something was holding him back from retrieving Tiger Fang from the war rune, though he was not sure why. He was relieved that he had brought a hidden artifact from home, and that nobody knew about it. Why am I relieved about that? Shouldn't I expose it and help Fenrir go hunt? That way, both of us can increase the refinement degree of, or am I worried about facing a Tier 1 monster even though I'm still tierless? That's probably it. While Michael was deep in thought, while keeping his eyes trained on the gem jaguar, Tiara smiled brightly. She bent down to take a closer look at the gem jaguar and diverted her focus to Fenrir a moment later. Please help me dissect the gem jaguar, Fenrir, Tiara requested, pointing at Fenrir's spear. They didn't have another weapon. After all, Michael continued to keep Tiger Fang hidden, even if their situation demanded every bit of help they could receive. Fenrir froze upon hearing Tiara's request. His eyes turned into slits, and he kept staring at Tiara for several seconds. Tiara was surprised about the sudden change in Fenrir's behavior, but it was nothing too surprising. A true warrior would never accept being unarmed. The spear could be considered Fenrir's final lifeline, and he wouldn't hand it over without a fight. My soul trait should be better than using Fenrir's spear. I can extract everything neatly using extraction. Michael intervened before the situation worsened. He was not sure where the tension between Tiara and Fenrir came from because he had been deep in thought, but he didn't want the only 2 subjects in his territories to fight. Michael squatted down next to Tiara, his eyes focused on the dead body. He stared blankly at the gem jaguar for a while as shudders spread through his entire body. It was the first time he saw a monster corpse up close. There was a lot of blood, and everything felt so different compared to the fights against the Emoctiles in the final examination. The Emoctiles were recreated from reality, but they were just illusions at the end of the day. It was different compared to the monster corpse, which didn't turn into countless particles upon getting killed. You are a lord now. You need to be strong, a role model, a true leader. Get your act together, you fool, he reprimanded himself. A moment later, he extended his hands and came to halt a few centimeters above the corpse. Several streaks of golden light conjured within his palms. The streaks of golden light reached out to the corpse, and they got to work. The gemstone embedded in the forehead of the monster detached itself, and it reappeared in front of Michael, completely unscathed and intact. There was not a single scratch on the tennis ball-sized gemstone. However, that was not everything. A black ball with bluish glowing streaks of light spreading through it materialized next to the gemstone. It was of a matching size and was a monster core. Every monster had a monster core. The energy of the origin was hoarded and stored in the monster core, refining it. In return, the monster core refined the body and mind of the monster. It was similar to the war rune in that aspect. An undamaged Tier 1 monster core of low quality and a Tier 1 gemstone. Looks like I'm quite lucky, Michael thought, uncertain of what price both materials could fetch him. Artificers used monster cores and gemstones as materials to craft artifacts. Thus, they would certainly have some value, though Michael was not too familiar with the price range of most items. But there were still more precious materials and items inside the gem jaguar. Michael's energy was quickly drained, but he continued to use extraction to search through the corpse for precious resources. And as if on cue, leather parchments materialized in front of him. There was a total of 4 leather parchments, and they looked like someone had custom designed them for him. Each leather parchment was roughly the same size, perfectly fitting in his palm. "What is Thar?" "Oh," Michael exclaimed. He held the parchments high in the air and began to smile brightly when a flash of information entered his mind. Fragments of a summoning scroll. Michael knew that some monsters in the Origin Expanse had a low chance of dropping loot, such as summoning scrolls, construction blueprints, unique crafting materials, and even artifacts. The drop rate was extremely low, but it was still existent. However, Michael never heard that it was possible for fragments of a summoning scroll to drop. The drop rate of unique loot was higher the stronger and more unique a monster. Nonetheless, Michael didn't expect much. The drop rates were simply too low, but extraction changed everything. His soul trait could extract everything. This was something Michael had already figured out by digesting most of the information he received upon awakening extraction. However, what he found out only now was that extracting everything was much more than what was visible to his eyes. Extraction was only a 2-star soul trait, but if it was truly possible to increase the drop rate of items unique to the Origin Expanse, wasn't that comparable to possessing a cheat? Michael's hair stood up on its end, and excitement spread through his entire being. What else can I extract other than summoning scroll fragments? Where is the limit? Is there even a limit in the first place? He chuckled as he kept extraction fully unleashed on the corpse of the gem jaguar. To think that I would get excited after spawning in a Tier 1 territory full of ferocious beasts that can tear me apart with a single slash. I am utterly insane. The Origin Expanse was mysterious and unique. Nobody really knew where it came from and the reason it existed in the first place. Too many aspects of the Origin Expanse felt like a game of conquest, which included the unique loot one could obtain from killing monsters. Everyone entering the Origin Expanse received a territory with unique buildings, a maid, and a few more items to reassure that everyone had a similar starting point. Why? What was the intention of the Origin Expanse's will and its creator with a game-like realm such as the Origin Expanse? Many theories existed, but only a few were popular. The most popular was that the creator of the Origin Expanse was an omnipotent being that had grown bored and tired of the universe. In this theory, the Origin Expanse had been built for his amusement, as he watched all races of the universe fight each other in a struggle to acquire more power, expand their territories, and claim resources for themselves to grow. Considering the Origin Expanse as a starting point, even life across the entire universe grew more interesting. After all, more races easily acquired technology that would have otherwise taken them thousands of years of research to come up with. This didn't even include the power countless races acquired by absorbing the dormant energy of the Origin Expanse. Of course, there were many other theories revolving around the mystery of the Origin Expanse creation, but nobody could tell right from wrong. That was why they were only theories and not facts. But even if the creator of the Origin Expanse had an evil plan in mind, did it really matter? The Origin Expanse was plundered every single day. Everyone tried to enhance their war runes tier, whether it was to expand their lifespan or to be able to fight against others outside the Origin Expanse, whether it was for protection or conquest. The resources, technology, and artifacts procured in the Origin Expanse were extremely valuable, speeding up a race's progress by millennia in a fraction of that time. And then there were also soul traits every being could awaken only in the Origin Expanse. It was of immense value, which nobody would want to miss. Michael was no different. He had also entered the Origin Expanse to become stronger and claim his own fortune. Of course, he had other goals as well, but Michael wished to repay his brother for everything he had done for him and to make sure that entitled brats, such as his former classmates, wouldn't be able to look down on him anymore. Acquiring the status of a lord was the basic requirement to change his life. However, only by becoming a powerful lord was it possible to make sure that nobody would bother him in a society that was led on with the thought that the strong reigned supreme. But for now, Michael had to suck it up. After using his soul trait for 2 minutes straight, he was exhausted. His shirt clung to his body as cold sweat trickled down his temples. I am really weak, Michael grumbled to himself, but he was not completely dissatisfied with himself. A faint smile formed on his lips as he wiped the sweat off his forehead. He felt quite pleased with himself upon seeing the neatly extracted, intact body parts of the gem jaguar spread out in front of him. Michael was not yet done with the extraction. However, 1 or 2 more uses of his soul trait were enough to finish up. By then, his proficiency in using extraction would improve, speeding up the entire extraction process. When I get back home, I should look out for an energy circulation technique. Michael made a mental note of an important task. Now that he knew what the Origin Expanse's energy felt like, he had to reconsider using a technique to improve his proficiency while wielding it. This would improve the refinement process of his war rune as well. If you have more energy left, can you hunt a few more monsters? If possible, a few more gem jaguars. I want to check something, Michael asked Fenrir, who had been silently watching him use extraction. Fenrir gave him a slight nod and turned around to go hunt once his curiosity was satiated. Are all heroic summons that rude, Master? Tiara asked, frowning deeply while squatting down next to him. As she looked at the extracted tendons, clean and intact bones along with the meat Michael had extracted from the gem jaguar, her hands began to itch to also do something for her master and prove her worth. However, she had yet to receive an order from her master. I don't know, maybe, Michael responded, not really minding Fenrir's attitude. He understood that Fenrir would need some time to accept him as his lord and master. He pointed at the gem jaguar's tendons and leather. I will continue to extract organs and whatever else I can from the corpse. How about you make some leather flasks in the meantime? Gem jaguars didn't have a coat of fur, but their body was covered in thick, leather-like skin. This was also why gem jaguars were sometimes labeled as tenacious hunters that were hard to kill. Michael was a little tired, but he got up from the ground nonetheless. He walked over to a nearby tree and a golden light conjured in his palm. A small splinter of wood formed in his palm, which he handed to Tiara. The splinter was extracted from the inner core of the rainforest tree's wood, making it more durable than ordinary needles. Tiara's tail wagged from left to right upon seeing what her master was capable of, and she nodded her head eagerly. Leave it to me. I can make hundreds of leather flasks, she exclaimed while reaching out for the extracted tendons and the bits of leather Michael had extracted for now. A few are enough, Michael mumbled before he sat down to take a few deep breaths. It was still early in the morning, but Michael was already dead tired. Using his soul trait, even before getting to know what Origin energy felt like, was probably not the most intelligent act. Unfortunately, it was not as if he had enough time to spare. There was no time to slack off. After a short break, Michael returned to the gem jaguar's corpse. He used extraction 2 more times on it before he was finally done. Thanks to his soul trait, the entire process was neatly completed, and the result was near perfect. Every part of the gem jaguar's body had been extracted cleanly and was intact. This chapter is updated by freeomegebnovel.com. Thus, he could use certain body parts such as leather and tendons without a need to worry about hygiene. The tendons were clean, and so was the leather. Not a single speck of blood or flesh was left on them after Michael cleanly dissected the gem jaguar's corpse using extraction. Once the flasks are created, I can extract and store monster blood much more easily. The blood of rare Tier 1 monsters should be worth something, Michael thought, finding multiple ways to earn money using the gem jaguar's remnants. The leather flasks were also useful for filling water extracted from branches that retained moisture. The dried branches could then be used as firewood, which would solve the remaining problem what to do with the high-quality meat of the gem jaguar. Using his soul trait extensively consumed way too much energy. Thus, consuming the meat of a Tier 1 monster should be more than enough to replenish his energy. As a tierless lord who had yet to refine his war rune, Michael's body was not able to store a high amount of energy. Thus, he would certainly be filled to the brim after consuming a small portion of the gem jaguar's meat. With that in mind, he got back to work. He left the clearing, picked up a few wooden branches and a handful of leaves before he returned. For starters, Michael used the gem jaguar's bones to construct a ring to restrain the campfire he was about to start. He extracted the moisture within the leaves and wood with his soul trait and began to set up the campfire. Then, using a rather primitive method of fire making, Michael spent the next 5 minutes creating a fire. Making fire by rubbing sticks together was rather primitive, and it required both practice and patience, but it worked perfectly fine. Nobody who entered the Origin Expanse for the first time could bring a flintstone or matches, so everyone in school had been taught how to make fire using dry wood. It was one of the things every student learned in the survival classes. Now that the fire had been ignited, Michael wanted to cook the meat and grill it on a stick. However, before he could do anything, the war rune on the back of his right hand began to glow faintly. A surge of energy spread through Fenrir's link of loyalty, filling his war rune with energy. The surge of energy was warm and soothing. It refined the war rune naturally, enhancing his strength a little. But that was not what Michael paid attention to. The storage space expanded. Michael could tell that the storage space of the war rune had expanded. It was not big by any means, but it was better than nothing. He had heard that most lords required several days until their war rune absorbed enough energy to expand their storage space. However, those lords hadn't spawned amidst a rainforest full of Tier 1 monsters. They wouldn't even encounter a Tier 1 monster in the first month, forget about being able to kill such a fierce monster. Fortunately, Michael had someone capable of doing exactly that, killing a Tier 1 monster. Fenrir barged through the rainforest's thicket and entered the clearing, pulling the second low Tier 1 gem jaguar behind him. The silver spear he carried in his left hand was covered in blood, while the corpse in his right hand left a trail of blood behind him. I got another one. Michael's eyes lit up, and he jumped up from the ground upon hearing Fenrir's voice. Right, I have Fenrir, he recalled, and his expression turned brighter upon glancing at the golden light that conjured in his palms. Who the hell says that our family is unlucky? Those idiots have no idea. How about I turn misfortune into an opportunity? Michael, Tiara, and Fenrir only stopped working when it was time to eat. They had to replenish their energy, and eating delicious chunks of Tier 1 monster meat was the perfect solution. The meat was rich in nutrition and was also highly invigorating. It was tasty as well. Other than savoring the meat they grilled and ate, the three worked relentlessly until late at night. If not for the seemingly infinite darkness that spread across the dense rainforest at night, Michael and the others might have continued burning the midnight oil. Working in darkness was not possible given the lack of light sources. Furthermore, everyone was tired after working for half the day. Fenrir kept on hunting until it was too dark. He killed a total of 17 low Tier 1 monsters with the use of the protection barrier, and he reached the low refinement degree of Tier 0 through the energy share of the killed monsters. Without Fenrir, everything would have been for naught. He could hunt monsters of a higher tier thanks to his exceptional display of combat experience, spatial awareness, and reflexes. His strength couldn't be underestimated just because he made use of the territory's protection barrier. It was not easy to injure monsters of a higher tier, no matter how easy Fenrir made. Meanwhile, Michael used extraction on the monster corpses to dissect them neatly. He removed their monster cores and their most valuable parts at first. Afterward, Michael focused his attention on the monster's blood. He extracted their blood twice to filter out impurities. This left him with the most potent blood, which was stored in the leather flasks Tiara had prepared beforehand. The leather flasks were marked to make sure that everyone knew which monster the blood belonged to before it was safely stored in Tiara's war rune. Her war rune storage was much bigger than Michael's, but that was only given. After all, Tiara's war rune was already at the first tier. When Michael found out about this first, he was confused. It was already very uncommon for a lord's personal maid to be from a different race, let alone be in possession of a war rune. However, Tiara was also not that weak. Michael just thought that she wasn't that powerful at first because she didn't really show what she was capable of. That changed over the course of the day. Talking to Tiara for hours and observing her meticulous work made it clear that she had dexterous hands and that she knew what she was doing. Her huge storage space came in handy as well. A war rune storage space preserved ingredients, which would go bad if left as it is for days. With that basic understanding of the war rune, Tiara gladly accepted turning into a living fridge. The extracted meat, organs, and blood were kept inside her war rune, making sure that nothing would go bad. They didn't want to waste any ingredients because they could be of future use or sold outside the Origin Expanse. Michael wanted to use his soul trait as often as possible. It was currently the only way for him to get a better feeling of the energy in the Origin Expanse and to increase his mastery of the soul trait's utility. He worked meticulously and didn't throw anything away. His life as Lord had just begun, and it was necessary to gather as many items as possible to fund his future expenses. However, that was something for later. Now, he and his subjects deserved to get some rest, so they all returned to the manor. Everyone had an assigned room in the wooden manor. There was little to no furniture, but there were beds, and that was enough. After a tiring but fruitful day, Michael got in bed and accessed the storage space inside the war rune. 3 ordinary summoning scrolls, 108 summoning scroll fragments, and a blueprint for a treehouse complex were stored inside. While he retrieved a handful of summoning scroll fragments multiple times, a faint glow engulfed them. The glow intensified the more fragments he retrieved. At last, once 25 summoning scroll fragments had been retrieved, they began to hover in the air. The fragments swirled around one another and connected to one another, merging into one. Slowly the glow dimmed, and a newly formed summoning scroll ended up falling into Michael's hands. 25 fragments form a complete summoning scroll. That's great, Michael thought excitedly before he repeated the same mythical process 3 more times. He was now in possession of 7 ordinary summoning scrolls and 1 blueprint. Even if Fenrir killed monsters a tier above his rank, being able to extract this kind of loot from less than 20 monsters was simply insane. His soul trait, extraction, was truly something that couldn't be put on the same level as other 2-star soul traits. Michael would never exchange it for a 4-star soul trait, even if he was given the opportunity. He was dead tired while lying in the comfortable bed and was ready to sleep. However, the thoughts flashing through his mind prevented him from falling asleep. Today was really interesting. Who would have thought that I would end up in a rainforest, surrounded by Tier 1 monsters? Well, I was able to handle the situation pretty well thanks to the heroic summon. Fenrir is a little unfriendly, and I cannot really see him warming up to me even in the future, but it should be fine. It has to be. Fenrir, I wonder where he comes from. Why does his name seem so familiar? Cleve Fenrir. Michael spent some time pondering over Fenrir. His eyelids got heavier by the second, and he could barely keep himself out of the dreamland. Which family has black hair and black eyes? Athletic, but not bulky spear arts Cleve. Unable to keep his eyes open, Michael finally fell asleep. The physical work he had done throughout the day was not that tiresome. However, repetitively unleashing his soul trait in its full power, over and over again, drained him both physically and mentally. He deserved some sleep, at least until the sun rose again, and the second day of his life as a lord would officially begin. While he was deep asleep, Michael was pulled back into a familiar scene. He had just seen it the day before, but he found himself watching a chaotic battlefield yet again. Tightly clutching the blood-soaked spear, and clad in black leather armor that had been torn to shreds, a man stood facing his opponents with a sly smile. His jet-black hair was disheveled, and his body was bruised and battered. However, he paid no heed to the wounds and instead let his gaze roam over the vast expanse. His vibrant eyes and his fierce gaze observed the enemies that surrounded him from all sides. There was no way out. The man knew that he would die here. But even in the face of imminent death, his expression did not falter. It was filled with mockery, and he was staring right at Michael. It was then that an illusionary, semi-transparent image of a familiar, grim-looking man appeared next to the man. Both of them wore different armor and wielded different-looking spears, but their eyes and hair were the same. Even their expression was the same. The illusionary image and the man slowly merged, fusing into one. They were now one and the same persona. Isn't that? Michael thought before the space around him twisted once again. He was pulled out of the dream and woke up, gasping in shock. It was already early in the morning, and the first rays of sunlight shone on his face through the open window. His second day as Lord had just begun officially, but Michael couldn't think about that at all. He was sweating profusely, and his clothes clung to his body. Instinctively, he looked down at his chest to make sure that there was no gaping hole. It was a dream, right? He looked down at his chest out of reflex and tried to calm himself by taking a deep breath. However, the image of Fenrir and the man, whom Michael recalled as the Fang family's first ancestor, fusing without causing the slightest change, left him shell-shocked. Oh, fuck. He was merely playing dumb in front of both him and Tiara to gather strength and wait for the best opportunity to strike. Even if he wouldn't remember his life as calamity, practicing the wicked spear arts meant that Fenrir would turn evil sooner or later. Fenrir was still weak and required the territory's protection barrier to hunt Tier 1 monsters. With the Lord's death, the protection barrier would disappear as well. Fenrir should have figured that Tiara was a Tier 1 maid as well. Attacking Michael while Tiara stayed by his side was not feasible for him yet. I hope you're not using the vile spear arts, otherwise, Michael thought with determination. Blood will be shed inside the protection barrier. He reached the final step of the staircase and emerged on the ground floor. It was only his second day in the Origin Expanse, but Michael could tell that blood and chaos would be served today. Master, how was your first night in the Origin Expanse? Did you sleep well? Master, how was your first night? Did you sleep well? Tiara asked, looking with concern at Michael. Now that Michael was aware of Fenrir's true identity, the gazes lingering on him felt like searing hot needles piercing his skin. Tiara might be acting just like before, being excited and happy that Michael didn't depart to the outside worlds yet, but Fenrir was clearly sizing him up from head to toe. Maybe that had happened already the day before, and Michael didn't notice it. Either way, he was now fully aware of every movement made by Fenrir. I was too excited to sleep. I must look like a big mess right now, Michael answered with a faint smile on his lips. He changed his answer midway upon realizing the piercing gaze with which Fenrir kept staring at him from the side. Michael noticed this, and it made him feel as if something was pressing against his throat. It was hard to breathe, and he broke into a sweat. You're sweating so much. Please don't be so stressed out about our predicament, Tiara voiced out in worry. If you don't sleep enough, you will get sick. We need you full of energy. Tiara's fluffy ears hung down limply, and her tail was also not swishing like. She looked down as well with a gloomy expression plastered on her face. What is wrong with this girl? Michael wondered, but his forced smile was soon replaced by a genuine one. Seeing that someone cared about his well-being was quite nice, and the real reason why she was so worried didn't really matter. He took a step closer to Tiara and flicked her forehead lightly, forcing the maid of the Silverfang tiger folk to look up. Upon seeing his smile, Tiara relaxed a little. She lightly patted her chest to calm down her heart and retrieved something from her war rune. The summoning gate produced one scroll this morning, she said, holding out an ordinary summoning scroll. Another perk of being a lord was that they would get summoning scrolls just by staying idle and letting the days pass. The summoning gate would produce one ordinary summoning scroll each day. Most subjects summoned through ordinary summoning scrolls would be starless or one-star summons, but that was still something. Slowly but steadily, a small workforce would come into existence. How about we use all summoning scrolls today? It's still early in the morning, so we will get lots of work done with a few more helping hands, Tiara proposed, rubbing her hands in excitement. It was only obvious to focus on increasing their numbers and use the additional working force to build a few residences, help Fenrir in hunting, and so on. However, Michael didn't want to summon any subjects right now. Why? There was a potential crazy serial killer in his territory. Was there really a need to come up with more excuses? Michael was already feeling bad for dragging Tiara into the mess. However, it was not as if he could send her away. She would just die outside the territory since there were way too many powerful monsters outside the safety of his protection barrier. I will postpone summoning subjects until the afternoon or tomorrow morning. There are a few things I must test out, and I don't want to rush things, Michael said as calmly as possible, trying to make it sound as if he had a strong plan and his schedule mapped out for the entire day. He had a total of 8 ordinary summoning scrolls. With that many additional helping hands, they would be able to build a few residences and create a more efficient hunting system. Slow and steady wins the race, Michael added, while stealing glances at Fenrir every now and then. And I want to win by all means. He knew that he shouldn't look at Fenrir so much, because Fenrir might notice that something was amiss, but Michael couldn't help it. He was also afraid that he would have a slip of tongue, but that didn't happen, fortunately. You look tired, Fenrir. Will you be fine going out hunting the entire day just like yesterday? Michael asked, trying his best to act as if he was concerned. But secretly Michael was glad that Fenrir's eyes were sunken and bloodshot. His hair was disheveled, and there were bags under his eyes, making them look puffed. Fenrir clearly hadn't gotten any sleep, which was something that could be made use of. I will be fine. I prefer hunting all day, Fenrir answered before excusing himself. He seemed eager to leave the wooden manor and go out hunting. Are you sure that you don't want to eat anything for breakfast, Fenrir? You will run out of energy until lunchtime, Tiara asked in a loud voice, but Fenrir had already stepped outside the wooden manor. Did he ignore me, or did he not hear me? Tiara mumbled upon seeing that Fenrir didn't turn around either. However, she didn't really mind it. Tiara was so happy that her lord didn't leave her to go back to the outside world, so nothing could dampen her spirits this morning. What do you want to test out that other subjects are not supposed to see, Master? She asked, while turning to Michael with gleaming eyes. Tiara figured that there had to be a secret nobody was supposed to know, otherwise her lord wouldn't postpone summoning more subjects. She could tell that her lord was not dumb, which meant that there was something he was hiding. Due to this, her curiosity increased even more. I can tell you later, probably, Michael responded before he had a light breakfast, which consisted of meat and more meat. They had yet to harvest fruits and other ingredients from the forest. Thus, their meals would have only meat for a while, but that was no problem. Fenrir's link of loyalty didn't change at all, Michael noticed while he had breakfast. Tiara's link of loyalty was a little different compared to the day before, but Fenrir's was the same. He tried to keep calm and not act too weird, but he was not sure how he was supposed to do that. Calm down and get your plan working. Michael wanted to find out whether Fenrir was using the wicked spear arts to kill his prey, but he didn't rush after him right away. Fenrir didn't seem to have slept, and he had skipped breakfast as well. Thus, it was better to wait a little longer to make sure that Fenrir would be a little bit more tired. Exhaustion and lack of sleep would make him lower his guard, and that way it would be easy for Michael to enact his plan. I will extract sturdy wood and stones from the trees and ground. You can either store them in your war rune or put them in one of the empty rooms inside the wooden manor, Michael proposed before he got to work. In the next few hours, nothing seemed different from the day before. Fenrir used the protection barrier to hunt monsters before he collected their corpses to carry it inside the clearing, where Michael would use his soul trait to dissect the body near perfectly. Nothing seemed amiss until it was about time to have lunch. Fenrir had killed a total of 10 low Tier 1 monsters, which rewarded 1 completed summoning scroll and 59 summoning scroll fragments. Meanwhile, Tiara and Michael focused on collecting resources from their surroundings. Tiara was not sure what, or why Michael was running around inside his territory, collecting resources with his soul trait when he could also summon subjects to harvest. However, she remained silent. It was not her task to teach her master, but to follow his commands. When she finished preparing lunch and was about to serve it, Michael suddenly announced that he would go and call Fenrir. He left the clearing in the direction Fenrir had gone toward a while ago, leaving Tiara by herself. Is that really fine? Isn't Master too bubbly and kind to be a lord? She mumbled to herself while observing the retreating figure of her master. Tiara liked people like Michael because they were true to themselves and others. Unfortunately, some would think of Michael as a pushover. It was highly likely that others would try to make use of her master for their personal gains. Tiara understood this very well. Shaking her head, she tried to ignore the memories of the past that resurfaced in her mind, and a glint manifested in her eyes. In that case, I will make sure that Master will be fine only, then he might be able to. She trailed off and went back to work. Meanwhile, Michael paved his way through the densely grown rainforest. Only a small part of the rainforest was inside the protection barrier, but it still took a while before he reached the barrier. As he neared it, he could hear the faint and distant sound of fighting. By the time he made his way through the thicket, Michael was only able to witness the end of the battle. Fenrir had used the protection barrier to fight two low Tier 1 monsters, a pair of gem jaguars. One of them was already lying on the ground, taking its last breath, while the other one was severely injured. The gem jaguar tried to break through the protection barrier to reach Fenrir, whose silver spear was shrouded in a dark purple hue. His lips curled up in a smirk as he dashed ahead. Fenrir thrust the silver spear forward, aiming straight at the beast. It was a simple attack without any unnecessary grace or elegance. However, that was not needed in the first place. The blade pierced through the gem jaguar's throat, ending the monster's life in seconds. Wow, Michael could only think in awe. His heart skipped a beat upon seeing the display of Fenrir's spear art, and a vibrant smile appeared on his face as he cleared his throat. Fenrir turned around in shock, ready to face his next opponent, only to see that Michael was waving at him with a vibrant smile plastered on his face. Nice kill, Fenrir. Lunch is ready. When Fenrir realized that the territory's lord had approached him and not some monster, he relaxed visibly. Michael was just a bubbly kid who became lord because everyone in the Origin Expanse started out as a lord. He was not dangerous. He didn't even have a weapon to begin with. Thus, Fenrir put the spear aside and pulled the two corpses inside the protection barrier. He saw Michael approaching, but didn't pay any attention. "Let me carry one of them," Michael offered, still smiling as brightly as before. His acting skill was top-notch. Not even he himself would be able to tell that his mind was in chaos if he were to observe himself as an outsider. The spear outfits the calamities. The moment Michael saw the dark purple hue shrouding Fenrir's silver spear, he knew that it was over. Fenrir might not recall all of his memories, but the fact that he used the wicked spear arts turned him into a much bigger problem than the monsters outside the protection barrier could be. As long as Fenrir was given enough time to grow stronger, nobody inside his territory would be able to handle the 7-star summon. Michael was trying to come up with a foolproof way to solve the entire mess now that he had found out that the worst-case scenario came true, but that was easier said than done. He was trying hard to chat lightly with Fenrir. Fortunately, Fenrir was not talkative. After a few attempts to strike up a conversation, Michael gave up. He was more likely to mess up and make some mistakes because his nerves were preventing him from thinking straight, either way. Both Fenrir and Michael carried one of the gem jaguar corpses each to the clearing. Tiara saw them and waved excitedly. She was a little surprised to see that there were two corpses, but didn't think too much about it. It was only obvious that Fenrir would become stronger the more monsters he killed. The energy influx he received from killing a Tier 1 monster was not little, and he was a 7-star summon. His basic combat prowess was already terrifyingly high in the first place. After adding the physical enhancement he received for every monster he killed, it was only a matter of time before he could leave the protection barrier to go out and hunt. This is good news, Tiara thought. Lunch is ready. Take as much as you want, Master, she told Michael before turning to Fenrir. Don't hesitate to eat your fill. You need to keep your energy level up, otherwise you may end up exhausted and make a big mistake. You didn't even have breakfast this morning. Tiara lectured Fenrir, but he simply ignored her. He sat down on a small wooden stool, which Michael had created by experimenting a lot with his new soul trait, and put the spear aside. His stomach rumbled, and Fenrir felt like he could eat a whole pig. He hadn't expected to encounter so many monsters this morning and regretted not having had a full breakfast. Tiara frowned upon noticing that Fenrir ignored her once again. She looked helplessly over to Michael, who kept smiling. The day before, Michael was like a starving wolf, gobbling the food she had prepared for them. However, today he seemed a little different. He didn't even eat a lot this morning. Wasn't he a glutton? Was she mistaken? After thinking about it for a few seconds, Tiara gave it a shrug. She concluded that maybe pondering a lot over the progress of the territory caused him not to feel too hungry. Fenrir picked up one of the thick sticks Tiara had used to grill the meat above the campfire. He took a bite of the juicy grilled meat, and it was as if his taste buds exploded. Was it possible for Tier 1 meat to taste that good? Fenrir doubted his taste buds, but he devoured the meat sticking to the spear, ensuring he did not leave even a tiny bit. Still nibbling on the remnants of meat hanging on the wooden handle, Fenrir picked up a second one. "Oh, this is much better than I expect," he said, looking at Tiara while continuing to eat. However, before he could finish his sentence, a bright light shone upon him as if something was glinting brightly in the sun on his left. At first, Fenrir didn't think too much about it because Michael was sitting to his left. Michael didn't have a reason to attack his own subject, forget about his only heroic summon, whom he needed desperately to begin with. Furthermore, this pushover of a lord was not even in possession of a weapon. There was no way that the bubbly, kind pushover could do something to him. But that was a gross underestimation, something Fenrir realized way too late when a nagging thought popped up in his mind. What item in Michael's possession could reflect sunlight? There shouldn't be anything like that, right? He wondered. When his head turned to the left, Michael was already in front of him, the tip of a longsword right in front of his face, inching closer mercilessly. Fenrir's eyes widened, and his instincts kicked in. He tried to evade the sudden attack, but he was too late. His hands moved upward to block the attack, only to realize that the silver spear was still resting on the ground where he had set aside to have food, and that he was only holding two wooden sticks. Gritting his teeth, Fenrir tried to launch a counterattack as a dark purple hue burst from his hands, enveloping the wooden sticks. Even if it was not possible to properly block the attack, his physical strength and instincts ought to be much stronger than Michael's. His refinement degree was much higher than Michael's, after all. It should be possible to change the trajectory of the fast-approaching blade. However, the moment Tiger Fang's tip pierced the dark purple hue, Fenrir's expression distorted into an ugly grimace. How can he be so strong? He cursed in his mind. What Fenrir didn't know was that Tiger Fang was an epic artifact, enhancing Michael's strength and perception drastically. But even without the enhancement, the blade's sharpness was enough to easily cut through the thin layer of dark purple hue and sticks without slowing down. At that moment, Tiger Fang's tip sunk deep into Fenrir's throat. Splash! Fenrir's eyes widened in shock. Earlier, Michael didn't smile vibrantly, but plastered a fake smile on his face because he had to. Fenrir had indeed been using the wicked spear arts of the Calamity, and Michael was simply waiting for the right opportunity to strike. He was the Calamity, or would have become one soon. Twisting the blade tip in Fenrir's throat, Michael bit down on his trembling lips hard, making them bleed while his shaking arm pushed the blade deeper into his opponent. Meanwhile, as the life in Fenrir's eyes dispersed slowly, a single thought flashed through his mind over and over again. Why? Inside a small basement of an apartment 510 years ago. Emergency news. Emergency news. Everyone listening to this podcast, pay attention to what I am going to say next. The universe has finally gone crazy. Thousands of youths vanished last night, and more than a dozen pictures denote the existence of white gates that have been found at the crime scene. Nobody knows what exactly these gates are or who created them, but I have spoken to a few witnesses during the last few days. According to the witnesses, the white gates sucked a member of their family or one of their friends inside after a sphere-shaped mole formed on the back of their right hand. We don't know what exactly happens, and most might not believe me, but be careful when something manifests on the back of your right hand. It might change your life. The shrill voice of a famous podcaster rang out from the small speaker placed on a wooden table in a small room. The table shook, and the walls in the small room trembled as well as something heavy smashed on the wooden table, breaking it into two. Several men began screaming in shock, drowning the podcast's voice by far and large. The shouting men were loud enough to silence the pleading youth. The government is trying to hide this news, saying that they want to prevent mass panic, but I don't believe that. And the government started the colonization project outside the solar system. But who cares about something like that when magic doors open all over the sun system, kidnapping people by sucking them inside? The sound of a blunt bat smashing down on something soft could be heard clearly, followed by a pained scream. "Stop, plea! Stop, Dad!" A weak scream and a plea for mercy escaped the lips of a young man. The young man, who was on the cusp of reaching adulthood, lay on top of the table that had been smashed into pieces with his body. His breathing was ragged, and even moving seemed like an enormous task. Every inch of his body hurt because he had been lifted and swung down mercilessly. Even if the young man knew that his father turned into a monster when he drank too much, today was different. The young man was accustomed to routinely getting hit, but his father had never lifted his body to smash him on the table, forget about using a bat before. Something had changed. Follow current novels on letter 192R Emacron, EWEBN, O Cyrillic letter 475, your L, C Sigmum. The abyss-like eyes of the young man stared at the towering figure of his father, and insanity was the only thing he could see in those eyes. His father finally snapped. Why is that happening to me? Why me? WHYY. You should hate your father a little more. He was stupid enough to get drunk and ask money from our men just to lose it all in gambling. This idiot is an utter failure, which is your misfortune. After all, you will have to sort out the mess he created. An unfamiliar voice reached the young man's ear. A middle-aged man with long red hair and heterochromatic eyes appeared in the doorframe of the smelly and moldy room. He was wearing a neat suit and smoking a cigarette while calmly watching the father beat up his one and only son with a glint of excitement in his eyes. "Why are you coming after me? My father can pay for his own shit because I'm not going to do it." The young man screamed in his head while feeling that the last strings of hope were viciously cut. In his mind, he got up from the ground and started fighting both the middle-aged man and his father. Unfortunately, it was all in his mind, nothing more. He didn't get up because he was too weak. Even if he had some strength left in his legs, the young man knew that he would never be able to beat his father. "You don't know me, but that doesn't really matter, kiddo. Your father just sold you your body, to be precise, to pay up for his debt. I told your lovely father to beat you up a little bit and kill you to make sure that there is no sense of attachment between you and your father. Not that I cannot already tell that right now," the middle-aged man added with a vile smirk that stretched in a devilish grin. "But I like to watch the desperation in the eyes of the victim when their own family stabs them in the back in your last moments. You will be filled with pain, anger, regret, and the overwhelming feeling of injustice, but you won't be able to do anything. Isn't that exciting?" The young man stared blankly at the middle-aged man standing in the doorframe, his eyes nearly popping out of his eye sockets. What? It was then that a lethal attack came his way. Swoosh! The bat smashed down on the young man's head. He could barely twist his neck to move his head a little, evading the impact by a hair's breadth. His father was utterly wasted, but he was a beast of a man with a weight of more than 150 kilograms and a height of more than 2 meters. The impact of the blunt bat crushed the remains of the wooden table beneath the young man, throwing wood splinters everywhere. It was at that moment when the young man knew his father was out for his life. "Dad, stop it. You can still stop. It's not too late yet." The young man screamed out as loud as he could, pleading his father to show some mercy. "Kid, just give up. Your death has already been sealed. You are nothing more than a host for our precious exclusive items now," the middle-aged man said calmly, but the young man wasn't having it. "Fuck off, you piece of shit," he screamed, only to realize that he had been distracted for too long. The wooden bat crashed down on his stomach, taking his breath away. Stars swam in front of the young man's eyes for a second or two, only to regain his senses when he was lifted high in the air. His father's black eyes stared mercilessly at his son as he pulled back the wooden bat once again. "Will I really die here?" The young man wondered, chaos and terror rioting in his head. "Hurry up and kill him. I don't have all day to spare," the middle-aged man said impatiently. He saw what he came for and lost interest in the father-son duo quickly. When the monster of a father heard the middle-aged man's words, he threw his son against the closest wall. The sound of cracking bones rang in the young man's ears, but there was little to nothing he could do right now. He could only see his father approaching him slowly, holding the wooden bat in a vice-like grip. No. That was the life of Cleve Fenrir moments, before he was sucked inside the Origin Expanse. It was a catalyst, in the creation of a true monster that everybody would loathe and fear. I don't want to die. Today was his 18th birthday. It was a day of celebration, something he ought to be happy about. However, today was certainly not a day that could be celebrated. The only present he was about to receive was his own death, freedom from the shackles of life. If I was only a little stronger, he thought in his last moments, had a little bit more strength, I would have fought against them. I would have never allowed father to hit mom, to hit me, or my sister. While bitter thoughts clouded his mind, the back of his right hand began to itch. A small, sphere-shaped rune formed on the back of his right hand. It was smaller than a marble and could easily be mistaken for a uniquely shaped mole. I wonder how they would fare after mercilessly abandoning me. Soon after, space cracked open, and a radiant light illuminated the room. The crack expanded in size until it was large enough to let a person through. Everyone stared blankly at the gate, their bodies frozen in place. I hope these whores soon die as well, he thought while looking at his father and the evil-looking man. A moment later, the Cleve Fenrir was pulled into the white gate. Cleve Fenrir disappeared, escaping his father's grasp and the hands of the unknown man. It was the same day these men would learn to regret to have hit him, to have forced him to become what he was. They should have killed Cleve Fenrir before it was too late. In a dense rainforest inside the Origin Expanse, present day, the last member of the Fenrir family stared deep into the dark, abyss-like eyes of the youngest child of the Fangs. A thin longsword separated them. Tiger Fang's tip burrowed deep into Fenrir's throat, and crimson-red blood gushed out of the wound. Fenrir's eyes were wide open and overflowing with shock and confusion. The life in his eyes slowly dispersed, but his hands were still moving. His hands tightly grasped the blade that had pierced his throat, trying to pull it out. However, Tiger Fang did not budge and continued to cut deep into Fenrir's palms. Michael's eyes quivered, and his breathing grew loud and ragged. He was overflowing with rage that made his hands holding Tiger Fang tightly tremble, and he subconsciously bit down on his lower lip hard, resulting in blood trickling down his mouth. Fenrir's lips parted a little, but no word came out of his mouth. He couldn't speak anymore. His hands grew heavier by the second, and he didn't have enough strength to fight back anymore. The moment he let go of the blade, his arms fell limply to his side. Michael's eyes were still locked with Fenrir's dark eyes. He witnessed up close how the life in Fenrir's eyes disappeared, and how the heroic summon's energy slowly left his body. And it was growing increasingly difficult for Michael to keep holding Tiger Fang as Fenrir's entire body weighed down on Tiger Fang. Michael tried to pull it out, but the sensation of cutting through his first ancestor's neck caused him to retch. His entire body felt eerily cold, and his mind was overflowing with guilt and remorse. I did the right thing, so why am I feeling like this? Michael asked himself desperately. He knew that Fenrir had to be killed. It was the only way to make sure that his territory wouldn't be doomed. It wouldn't even end with the destruction of his territory the moment Fenrir would recover the power he amassed in the past. He would stop at nothing to lay waste throughout the Origin Expanse. Fenrir had to die. But then why did Michael feel like this? Cutting through Fenrir's throat was disgusting. Michael felt nausea from the sensation, and he was disgusted by himself. Not only had he attacked Fenrir, but it was a dirty attack, an assassination precisely planned to strike Fenrir when he was tired, hungry, and unarmed. Fenrir hadn't even been on guard against Michael when he manifested Tiger Fang. Only when Tiger Fang's fangs were bared and about to dig into Fenrir's throat did he react. Of course, it was already too late by then. Michael fell into a state of shock as he staggered back a little. The realization that the first time he killed another human was sinking in. In fact, it was the first time he had killed any living being. The emoctiles in the final exam didn't count. Michael knew that they were illusions, so he didn't pay much attention to them. However, the slowly dying summon in front of him right now was different. The last remnants of life inside Fenrir dispersed, and he collapsed on the ground where his body writhed a few times before it came to a halt. Meanwhile, blood trickled down Tiger Fang's blade before it fell to the ground. A moment later, Tiger Fang turned into a white wisp that returned inside the war rune. Michael clutched his chest, and he began to vomit. His legs caved in, and he slumped to the ground where he continued to empty out his stomach for the next 20 minutes. At the same time, Tiara stared at the turn of events with a deathly pale face as shock spread through her entire being. What? She mumbled, unable to move. Her lord just killed his one and only heroic summon, who was also one of his two subjects. Michael had only two subjects, and he had just killed one of them. Did he plan to kill her as well? No, that shouldn't be the case. Michael was a bubbly and kind lord. He didn't feel satisfied or relieved after killing Fenrir either. Otherwise, he wouldn't be on the ground, emptying his stomach while trembling like a leaf in the wind. It took Tiara quite a while to regain her senses. She had been staring blankly at the heroic summon's dead body and her vomiting mask. Something felt odd, but Tiara wasn't able to make sense of the lack of clues at her disposal. She approached Michael carefully, bent down next to him, and slowly rubbed his back. The link of loyalty and her gut feeling told her that Michael was not a bad person. She had a bad feeling about Fenrir, but the exact opposite reaction toward Michael. Thus, rather than avoiding Michael, she felt like helping him. It was only a matter of time before she would uncover the truth of what had just happened. Why? Michael asked weakly when his stomach had been emptied, but Tiara couldn't quite understand. Why aren't you asking anything? Tiara continued to rub his back, without saying anything for a while. Her gaze kept nervously flicking from Fenrir's unmoving body to Michael. There was something about them that made her senses tingle, but she was not quite sure what it was. I am your servant, your personal maid, not your supervisor whom you have to report to, Tiara said, while trying to stay as calm as possible before she added. I think you will tell me why you did that if you want to. If not, it's fine as well. My job is not to question my master's decision, but to support them, even if they're wrong. Michael looked up and met Tiara's eyes. She was clearly forcing herself to stay calm and smile at him, and he was more than grateful for that, as that was exactly what he needed right now. It would have been worse if someone was to ask him hundreds of questions right now. He was not even sure what was going on inside his head, so how would he be able to explain everything to Tiara right now? After he saw Tiara's reaction, Michael finally calmed down. He couldn't look at Fenrir's corpse right now as he was struggling to gather his thoughts. Michael began, trying to tell Tiara what had happened. However, his mouth fell shut a moment later as the memories of Tiger Fang piercing Fenrir's throat resurfaced in his mind. He retched again just a moment later, but there was nothing left in his stomach to vomit. I will clean up the mess and prepare a light meal for you. You might not want to eat something right now, but you will fall sick if you don't eat anything, Tiara said before she got up. Cleaning up the mess didn't take that long. She dragged Fenrir's corpse and placed it next to the gem jaguar corpses. After that was done, she retrieved the silver spear and used a wooden shovel, which was another of Michael's creations from this morning, to clean the rest. Only when everything was cleaned up a little did she return to Michael, who was sitting on the ground in front of the campfire. Her master seemed like a lost soul, but the firmness in his eyes had returned. Was that the first time you killed someone? She asked, knowing that it was out of place to ask this as a servant, but Michael didn't mind. He just nodded his head and continued to stare into the flames. Tiara grilled a small chunk of meat and handed it over to Michael. He was not hungry, but he forced himself to eat nonetheless. Half an hour later, he was done, and he began to speak, revealing everything he had found out so far to Tiara. Within less than 10 minutes, Tiara's expression changed over a dozen times. At first, she didn't think that Michael's words made sense, however. When he showed her the mark behind his ear, Tiara's doubts dispersed. The mark behind his right ear was distinct, and it didn't take more than 10 seconds for her to get up, move to Fenrir, and find the same mark behind his right ear. Fenrir is the first ancestor of your family, and one of the first humans who entered the Origin Expanse 5 centuries ago. He was labeled the calamity in this tome your family inherited, and you figured that Fenrir was the calamity this morning when you had a dream about the past, in which the images of the calamity and Fenrir overlapped. Tiara summarized in a heavy tone. It sounded bizarre, and like some tale spewed by a drunkard on an evening when he had finished a few bottles of. Nonetheless, Tiara believed what he said. Michael's body language and the way he spoke were clear indicators that he wasn't lying. Massacring the Golden Taken, the Empyrean Dragoneer, and being a well-known slave merchant across the entire continent, to think that the Origin Expanse would summon someone like this as a heroic summon. The will of the Origin Expanse must have a few loose screws. She mumbled upon recalling the things Fenrir had done in the past. Michael had also told her that Fenrir practiced the same wicked spear arts as mentioned in the book. When she heard what the wicked spear arts did to someone, she smiled at Michael. "You did the right thing by killing him," Tiara said with conviction in her voice. Fenrir was already close to the mid-refinement levels of Tier 0. If not for him being unguarded and exhausted, maybe not even your surprise attack, or the fact that your artifact is extremely sharp, with a strong enhancement effect at the tip, would have been enough to kill him. Listening to Tiara didn't give him new intel. Michael was fully aware that he would have died if not for the factors Tiara pointed out. However, it didn't matter in the end. Michael was the one who emerged victorious, while Fenrir was the one who died. Whether it was a coincidence or not, his heroic summon had been a piece of shit, and only the Fangs were aware of that. Michael was not sure what happened, but the name Cleve Fenrir or Cleve Fang, which was the name used in the tattered book, had been removed from the annals of history. Did that mean Michael had been lucky? Was the Origin Expanse after the Fangs, or did the will of the Origin Expanse try to resurrect the calamity to cause death and destruction across the Origin Expanse once again? Michael was not too sure about that. However, he could tell that his current situation was fucked up. He had lost his powerhouse and the strongest force in the territory, and the protection barrier would disappear in a little bit over and above the period of 8 days. It would be great if he was able to summon another hero, but were they easy to summon? Heroes didn't grow on trees. Michael was at a loss for quite a while, and he could only feel the severed link of loyalty and the energy influx from killing a low, tierless heroic summon. After giving it some thought, Michael gathered his courage and approached Fenrir's corpse. It was time to make use of his soul trait and reap as much as possible. And with that thought, he held his hand up above the corpse of Fenrir, and his hands began to glow golden a few moments later. The energy influx Michael received from killing Fenrir increased his refinement degree. His war rune also increased slightly in size, and he officially became a low Tier 0 lord on his second day inside the Origin Expanse. He had already accumulated quite a bit of energy from the 29 low Tier 1 monsters Fenrir had hunted. Michael should be happy that his strength increased and that the war rune's storage space expanded. However, his expression was grave. He could only stare down at Fenrir's corpse, feeling nauseous at the sight. "Get your act together. You knew that this was bound to happen the moment you found out about his identity. If you wouldn't have killed him, Fenrir would have ended you eventually," Michael mentally chided himself. He squatted down at last and activated his soul trait. His hands were already glowing in a faint golden light, but the luminescence intensified later. The energy inside Michael was drained rapidly as he targeted Fenrir's corpse with extraction. Sweat beads trickled down his temples, and Michael's breathing grew unstable in the next few seconds. Nonetheless, Michael fought the urge to stop exerting his soul trait. He continued using extraction until the last bit of energy inside his body was used up. "Please give me something good," he pleaded with little hope. Even though he had killed the parasite inside his territory, Michael had also lost his entire combat force. It was not an exaggeration to say that he had to start again from scratch. He would hunt Tier 1 monsters now that Fenrir was dead. Michael had to do it alone or ask Tiara to help him. He was not sure if Tiara had ever been trained in martial arts or faced with the dangers of life and death combat, but she was a Tier 1 maid. Her physical strength was incomparably higher than his. "Ah, what is that?" Tiara suddenly asked. Michael looked at her just to see that she was pointing at the drops that had manifested next to Fenrir's body. Michael had extracted the items, but he had yet to pay any attention to them. Using his soul trait was already taxing enough and required his complete concentration. Separating his attention to do other things alongside the exertion of his soul trait was not possible for him, at least not yet. Oh. Upon looking at Fenrir's drops, Michael was a little astonished. Several items had dropped after he used extraction, but Michael was only familiar with the summoning scroll. However, it was a specific summoning scroll because it had the occupation, tracker, labeled on it. A warrior would have been better, but I guess a tracker isn't too bad either, he thought. Trackers were pretty good at scouting the surrounding landscape. They were better than scouts and could track the lair of monsters using the smallest clues and spotting them at places nobody would even think of looking. All in all, Trackers were useful as long as you could use them well. It was only a slight bummer that a tracker summoning scroll manifested from the corpse of a heroic summon. Whatever, Michael told himself, thinking that the other drops were much better. Other than the tracker summoning scroll, Fenrir's body rewarded 3 more types of items. The first was a fist-sized wisp. Michael was not sure what exactly he had extracted from Fenrir, but he knew that he would find out soon enough. The next unknown item were a bunch of small transparent marbles, 7 of them. Purple streams of energy swirled inside the hollow marbles, attracting his attention. He wanted to crush them to find out what would happen to the strands of energy, but he held back, sensing that the war rune was reacting to them. The war rune began to itch, and it began to glow much brighter than before. Is that energy to strengthen the war rune? Michael wondered, subconsciously moving one of the marbles closer to the war rune. In response, a tentacle-like white strand shot out of the war rune. The strand coiled around the marble before pulling back, disappearing with the marble inside the war rune. "What the?" he blurted out, closing his eyes just a second later. New novel chapters are published on Letter 192R, EEWEB, and Retroflex, OVEL.com. To understand what just happened, he focused on entering the deepest part of his consciousness. After doing that, Michael was able to see the white light in the center, surrounded by the wisp of Tiger Fang and the extraction emblem. Nothing changed, Michael wondered. He clearly felt that something inside him changed after the white strand pulled the marble inside the war rune, but it looked like there was no change in the war rune. No, wait. Upon paying more attention to Tiger Fang and the extraction emblem, Michael could make out a difference. It was an insignificant change, but something had changed about his soul trait. The stigma of extraction had only 2 stars before. However, now that he looked at it more in detail, Michael realized that faint outlines of a 3rd star were beginning to form. "These marbles increase my soul trait's star rating," Michael nearly shouted aloud. Goosebumps sprang up all over his body, and the things that happened in the next few seconds seemed like a dream. He picked up the remaining marbles with the unknown purple energy streams and allowed the white strand of the war rune to take them all. Meanwhile, Michael never left the deepest part of his consciousness and continued to witness everything firsthand. A 3rd star is actually forming. He realized in shock upon seeing that the purple strands of energy shot inside the stigma of extraction the moment they were released. The marbles he extracted from Fenrir's body were not enough to form a complete 3rd star, but a 3rd star was on its way. I am not dreaming, right? Michael wanted to figure out the reason why these purple marbles dropped to make sure that he could mass extract them in the future, when the tentacle-like white strand of the war rune shot out once again. It moved faster than Michael could think, and tightly grasped the 3rd unknown item that had dropped after Fenrir's body had been fully extracted. It was a small coin-sized emblem with an eagle's eye. 2 purple stars were beautifully carved on the top of the emblem. The moment the white strand touched the stigma, it began to glow vibrantly. At the same time, the white light in the deepest part of his being began to shine brighter as well. They reacted to one another. Slowly, a new symbol formed inside the bright light of the war rune. It showed the same emblem of the eagle eyes he had seen on the item that dropped from Fenrir. Wait a moment, he thought, slowly realizing what was going on when he was surprised by a flood of information swamping his mind. This has to be a dream, he mumbled when he comprehended what had just happened. He had just extracted another being's soul trait and made it his own. When Fenrir was still a lord, he had the 8-star soul trait Divine Eyes, Michael recalled. Does that mean Divine Eyes turned into the 2-star soul trait, Eagle Eyes? The flood of information that swamped his mind when Eagle Eyes manifested had already been digested. He knew how to use his new soul trait and the special benefits of Eagle Eyes. Eagle Eyes was a 2-star soul trait that passively enhanced his eyesight. It could be used actively as well to further amplify his eyesight. It was strong if used wisely. If I could extract Eagle Eyes from Fenrir, does that mean I can use extraction to extract the soul traits of other beings as well? Michael wondered, but he quickly shook his head. Summoned subjects shouldn't possess their former soul trait anymore. Was I just lucky then? Countless thoughts flashed in his mind, and most of them were bound to remain unanswered. Fact is that I can extract soul traits and soul trait fragments, or marbles, or whatever they're called. It looks like I can upgrade extraction and eagle eyes if I collect more soul trait fragments, and it shouldn't be impossible to collect more soul traits as well. That's insane. The most important question was not how to collect more soul trait fragments, but to find out the details related to the drop rates of soul traits and soul trait fragments. What kind of beings would drop soul trait fragments upon being extracted, and why? The most logical answer to this was extracting the corpses of lords and adventurers. They possessed soul traits, after all. Shouldn't he be able to extract their soul traits as well then? Will it be that easy? It's not like a 2-star soul trait is bad still. Why was I only able to extract a 2-star soul trait from Fenrir? He had divine eyes. Does the star rating deteriorate? Why? One question after another formed in his mind, and it looked like Michael would never be able to escape the cycle of questions and uncertain answers. Is it because extraction is only a 2-star soul trait? Would it mean I will be able to only extract 2-star soul traits? HM. Fortunately, Michael chose to put an end to the series of questions and uncertain answers right here. He would find out the truth eventually either way. The answers were waiting for him, and it was not as if he was in a rush to know everything. However, there was something that could be answered immediately. Did extraction grow stronger upon digesting the soul trait fragments? Michael was still a little tired from using extraction on Fenrir, but he went ahead and extracted the drops from the gem jaguar corpses, nonetheless. Only extracting the drops created by the will of the Origin Expanse wasn't as taxing as dissecting the entire body precisely using extraction. However, it was enough to tell just how strong extraction had grown. A wooden warehouse blueprint, an ordinary summoning scroll, and 14 summoning scroll fragments. Even if the first 2 drops were mostly luck, extraction had grown much stronger and more efficient. He mumbled before extracting the monster cores and gemstones as well. They're a little bit cleaner than before, and a tad bit brighter. Have they been purified through extraction, or are they just in a better condition than the other monster cores and gemstones? Michael's words reached Tiara's ears, but she could only stare blankly at her master. She could roughly guess what he was doing, but she didn't understand the concept behind his soul trait at all. Michael informed Tiara that his soul trait was called extraction. Even without him telling her, she would have found out eventually. Michael wasn't trying to hide his soul trait, and one would have to be ignorant, stupid, or just extremely dense to be unable to find out what Michael's soul trait was capable of. Spending half a day next to him was already more than enough to figure out everything even for a maid. However, she couldn't really process what had happened just now. Her war rune's reaction to the items Michael extracted from Fenrir was volatile. The reaction was extremely violent, and it nearly made her act subconsciously. Tiara's hand reached out to the emblem and the purple marbles, which Michael absorbed not long after. It was great to see that Michael could feel excited so soon after he had killed someone the first time, but Tiara couldn't feel the same. She was not sure what Michael had done, and this uncertainty ate her from the inside. Can I ask him what just happened? No, a maid is not supposed to ask questions, Tiara thought dejectedly, while looking at the last item that dropped from extracting Fenrir. Master, please don't forget to use this item, she spoke after a while to fill the awkward silence surrounding them both. Somehow, she didn't want Michael to forget that she was also there and that she could help him. There was no need for him to carry all responsibility upon his shoulders. Michael looked at the white wisp for a moment before he turned his attention to Tiara. The look in her eyes attracted his attention. You can ask if you're curious about something, but let me ask some questions in return as well, he said with a faint smile on his lips. Michael had many questions about Tiara, which included why she was a Tier 1 adventurer who had turned into the maid of a lord. There had to be a reason why someone not native to the Origin Expanse had been chosen as his personal maid. Tiara was also much stronger than most personal maids of new lords. Michael knew that they had many things to do now, that they had only 8 days left in the Origin Expanse with the protection barrier around their territory. The number of subjects at his disposal was insignificant if he ignored Tiara and the summoning scrolls. And the only information Michael had about the surrounding region was that the proximity was filled with Tier 1 monsters. Other than that little piece of information, Michael didn't know a thing about the dense rainforest. Tiara locked eyes with Michael and bowed her head lightly in response. Your offer is very kind, but I am not allowed to speak about certain subjects. The questions you have in mind are probably related to those subjects, and I cannot answer them even if I were to sacrifice my status as your personal battle maid. Master, Tiara kept looked down at the ground and did not raise her head again. Michael could only see her gloomy expression, and her ears drooped limply before she regained her composure. She smiled apologetically and bowed once again. So the will restrains her, and what is that about battle maid? Well, she never looked like an ordinary maid before, but I expected her to be royalty of the Silverfang tiger folk and not a battle maid. What even is a battle maid? The title suggested that Tiara was able to fight, but Michael felt that the title had more meaning and that he was just ignorant of the obvious truth staring at him. Most people say that the will of the Origin Expanse is illogical and random, that it does everything without reasoning, but is that really the case? Michael wondered, feeling deep down that the will had its own reasoning. It was just harder to comprehend. While he was still deep in thought wondering about various things, Michael's hand reached out for the white wisp. However, the moment he touched it, something unexpected happened. The wisp burst apart and turned into several white streams that shot toward his head. They entered his mind, filling his brain with countless pieces of information. No, it wasn't countless pieces of information. What Michael received were memories, snippets of Cleve Fenrir's past life. Michael's eyes rolled so far back in his head that one could only see the white, and blood gushed out of his nose like a waterfall as the memories forced their way into his mind. He collapsed on the ground, writhing in pain while trying to fight the flood of information. Tiara gasped in shock and rushed over to him instinctively. She reacted fast, but she couldn't help him even if she wanted to. Michael only stopped writhing in pain after 5 minutes, and it didn't take long before a curse escaped his lips. I cannot get even a moment of peace, can I? Why did he feel like this? A particular memory was seared in his mind. It was the memory of Fenrir practicing the wicked spear arts. Even after Fenrir's true death, Michael was not able to get rid of his memories and his spear arts.